direction and place, do you feel a sense of peace now? And I wonder if you feel like we can truly heal from life's those difficult traumas.
I think those difficult traumas that happen throughout your life, you don't ever heal from them or get over them. But they add to the sum total of who you are and keep you going. They help you find your place in the world, which is why I went into government and worked in the public service. Because I thought I could stand on the outside and yell at government, or I can be in it and take it where I think it needs to go, which is what I did. Healing for me is not about me, it's about what I'm doing for everybody else. We're doing treaty, and we're doing the Stolen Generations Reparations package, and we're opening doors for Aboriginal people beyond the narrow confines of where people think, isn't that all that Aboriginal people do? That's how I've managed to deal with the peaks, but particularly the troughs.
Ian Ham, it's been an absolute pleasure to have a yarn with you. Thanks for joining me on 1+1.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Today, from rebellion to retreat, the head of the Wagner mercenary group leaves Russia after a de-escalation deal brokered by Belarus. Also ahead, Canada launches a joint investigation with the US Coast Guard into the loss of the Titan submersible. An urgent warning issued with 2 dams at high risk of failure after a week of heavy rain in Adelaide. And thousands march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge celebrating 25 days to the Women's World Cup. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Korowa. A short-lived mutiny against the Russian government has come to a negotiated end. Wagner mercenaries, which had been threatening to march on Moscow, have backed down after a deal brokered by Belarus. Just 24 hours ago, the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, had declared a rebellion against the Russian Ministry of Defense, accusing Russian forces of firing on his troops. Now he's left the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, cheered on by crowds. The city had come under the private army's control when its troops left Ukraine. But Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko intervened, brokering a deal to call off the rebellion.
They wanted to disband the Wagner military company. We embarked on a march of justice. In 24 hours, we got to within 200 kilometers of Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of our fighters' blood. Now the moment has come when blood could be spilled. Understanding responsibility for the chance that Russian blood will be spilled on one side, we are turning our columns around and going back to field camps as planned.
Under the agreement, the Kremlin has dropped all charges against Prigozhin, who will leave Russia and head to Belarus. Ukraine's president says the incident shows that Russia is in chaos.
Today is a day when there should definitely be no silence. Today, the world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. Complete chaos. Complete absence of any predictability. And it is happening on Russian territory, which is fully loaded with weapons.
Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has made a statement saying Australia is closely monitoring developments in Russia, adding the federal government will continue to condemn Russia's immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Global Affairs editor John Lyons has more on the situation in Russia and the implications for Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine.
I think it's a high-stakes chess game. This is not the end of the story by any means. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a very smart operator. Sometimes people underestimate him. You don't go from being in jail. I mean, who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? He was in jail when he was 20. As an 18-year-old, he got into crime. He a tough childhood. 20, he's sentenced to jail for 12, 13 years for robbery and fraud. He then leaves jail, becomes a hot dog salesman, then does well at that, opens a restaurant, does well at that, he knew Vladimir Putin from St. Petersburg, starts getting contracts to cater for the army and for the elite, ends up a billionaire oligarch who basically faced down yesterday the man he used to serve nice meals to. So I think that where this goes next is Yevgeny Prigozhin. They got to the edge of the conflict. They did a deal. Putin didn't want to have a fight. You can see on the picture on the screen now, it seems like a rock star. You know, the warmth, the hugging, he was like a hero. No one tried to arrest him. The security forces didn't detain him. This is a man who has just said that Vladimir Putin has conducted an entire war based on a lie. This is a man who has said that the chief general who drove it did it because he wanted another star on his lapel, so when he laid in his coffin on a nice pillow, he'd have a nicer uniform. So he's gone all out attacking them. He now goes to Belarus. That's the deal. And they came back from the brink of civil war, but I think he will sit in Belarus and plot. The generals, the oligarchs will all now realise that Putin is a weakened figure.
So does bringing Belarus into the picture take some of the pressure, though, off Vladimir Putin? Is that the way that they've had to de-escalate this?
It solves the immediate pressure. We've seen pictures in the last few hours of the Russians, the forces, security people were digging up roads. They had bulldozers digging up the highways that led to Moscow to try to stop the Wagner people getting to Moscow. They got to within 200 kilometres. They were 2 hours drive away. So it shows you not a single soldier tried to stop Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner people. I think for Vladimir Putin, that would be what he'd be reeling about now. He'd be stunned by the fact no one tried to stop him. They were getting a hero's welcome. So the problem doesn't go away for Vladimir Putin. He is in a lot of trouble.
It buys him a little bit of time, but my next question is, now that we have Prigozhin going to Belarus, Wagner troops now retreating back into Ukraine, what do we anticipate will be the chain of command there?
I think that he'll pull the troops out of Ukraine. I don't think he'll stay there. I think now in his interests, Prigozhin's interest, now that he's declared his hand, that the war fails. So I think that's the end of Wagner's fighting, and they've been crucial. They have held Bakhmut and done all sorts of things, and so it weakens the Russian army. And so Prigozhin's, dream plan in a way would be the war fails, Putin's in trouble. They're looking for a charismatic leader who's got the cred. He's got a lot of credibility, Prigozhin, and with the Russian army and with the Russian people. He's very popular. People like him. He's blunt talking. He's been in the trenches. Yesterday, he argued the reason for doing this to Belarus is I didn't want any Russian blood spilled. It's a good line. I mean, a very smart political line. Putin would spill blood, Russian blood. That's the implication. He didn't want it, so he's done this deal. So he's gone right into the lion's cage. He's looked the lion in the eye, and we can see him there. He's straight talking. The Russian government has tried to stop him appearing on Russian television over the last year. There's been a ban on some television stations even having him on. Putin's threatened by him, but has needed him. So it's an intriguing relationship between these two who've known each other for 25 years. They know each other's nature, and I think Prigozhin's playing a wonder of a game. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
The Kremlin has also dropped that criminal investigation, so what does that tell you?
Well, it says that I think that it's a capitulation by the Kremlin, that they were surprised by, the audacity of Prigozhin to pull his troops out of Ukraine, to go to Rostov-on-Don, to take control of all of the military facilities in the headquarters of what was running the Ukraine war, then say, I'm coming to Moscow. They then get in their cars and their convoys. They then, go off and take Voronezh. They take a second town of control of that. So the message from him is, we go where we want to. Nobody stopped him. The Ukrainians haven't been able to kill him. The Russian army haven't been able to stop him. So it gives him this sort of status in a country that appreciates and values its military and its strong men. It gives Prigozhin a really big launching pad. I think at some point he's looking for that political career to be a president. When Putin falls, there'll be a scramble for who takes over. He's now in the sort of box seat.
So, as you say there, Vladimir Putin's authority is completely undermined by these developments. What do you anticipate might be going on there in terms of the political power plays, the allegiances that are being drawn up there?
Well, yesterday we saw the speech of Putin. That was not sort of your classic confident Putin. So I think there'll be a lot of people who've been watching this catastrophic war for Ukraine. It's been a disaster for Russia in every sense. The thousands of young Russian lives that have been lost needlessly, the destruction of their neighbour, the international sanctions. The oligarchs have had all the yachts and apartments in France and other places frozen. So I think now there'll be plenty of people sitting there plotting. If they've got a chance to get Vladimir Putin, they will. I think someone will strike at some point. It's a matter of working out the coalitions, the private armies. You've got this sort of chessboard of the Gazprom private army of 50,000, Wagner got 25,000, someone else has got 20,000. How do you stitch together an alliance, get the right people in the inner circle and then strike? I think that now it's a matter of Putin will be watching not just the cups of tea that he drinks because he's convinced someone trying to poison him, but I think he'll be watching every person around him.
Taking that chess analogy a little further, we have Prigozhin targeting in particular the Defence Minister Shoigu and the military commander Gerasimov. Are we anticipating any changes in terms of Russia's military command?
I don't think Putin could do it at the moment because it would look like he was bowing to Prigozhin. Putin has been often getting rid of a national security advisor, all the people running the campaign in Ukraine. He's dispatched a lot of them, sacked them. And so each time he sacks someone like that, he gets another high-powered, powerful enemy there. So in a way now, he's got that little Praetorian guard around him of people who will protect him, the ex-KGB people, the people he trusts. The waters are lapping up at the edge of him. And I think that at some point, he's got a meeting with destiny. He's going to meet his own fate. And he realised yesterday that that could come close.
Canadian investigators have begun an inquiry into the Titan submersible, which imploded last week during a deep dive to the wreckage of the Titanic. Police and safety inspectors boarded the support ship, the Polar Prince, after it returned to port in Newfoundland. Canadian authorities have begun interviewing the crew to help determine what caused the tragedy. The chair of Canada's Transportation Safety Board, Fox, says they'll take the time they need to do a thorough investigation.
We take the time we need to do a thorough investigation, and we're in the early stages, and we need to scope out the lines of inquiry. Typically, our investigations can take 18 months to 2 years. We obviously try and do them quicker because we know everybody wants answers, particularly the family, the public, etc. We need to take the time. Our mandate is to investigate from a safety perspective, identify what happened, why, and what can be done to reduce the risk of it happening in the future.
Today marks 1 year since the US Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, ending the constitutional right to abortion in the United States. Since then, 14 states have passed near total bans on the practice. In many others, the fight over abortion access is still taking place. President Joe Biden says he will veto a national ban if Congress moves to implement one.
We've seen the devastating effects all across the country. Women turned away from emergency rooms, denied life-saving care. Moms, college students, teachers, nurses, traveling hundreds of miles to get basic reproductive health care. And since that dark June day last year, each of you has worked tirelessly to fight back. And the Dobbs decision, the court practically dared women of America to be heard. This is the majority vote. Women are not without electoral or political power. You ain't seen nothing yet, court.
A second dam failure warning has been issued by the South Australian State Emergency Service, this time for the Adelaide Hills. It says the dam could threaten the safety of residents along Lobethal Road between Basket Range and Ashton. Meanwhile, roads are still blocked around a dam also at risk of failing south of Adelaide. The dam at Hope Forest could be a risk to several properties in the area. More severe weather is lashing the region today. Nationals leader David Littleproud has played down suggestions his position in the party is under threat. Anonymous Nationals MPs have criticised Mr Littleproud's leadership in News Corp papers. Their concerns include allegations the Queensland MP has a reputation for losing his temper at colleagues and staff. Mr Littleproud told Channel 9 he's not worried about a potential leadership spill.
We're all on borrowed time in politics. Don't worry about that, no matter your political party. Look, a couple of proofs there goes, look, it's the Quest party room, and I've never taken anything for granted being a leader. It's the greatest honour I've ever been given to lead the party that I joined 25 years ago.
Funerals for victims of the New South Wales Hunter Valley bus crash will begin from tomorrow. 28-year-old Angus Craig will be farewelled by family and friends at a memorial service near Nowra on the state's south coast. 10 people were killed in the crash while several others were injured when the bus rolled a Greta earlier this month. Federal Housing Minister Julie Collins says the ACT's rental regulations don't work in the long term. In the territory, landlords cannot increase rent beyond the rate of inflation plus 10%. The policy was introduced by the ACT government in 2019 and also limits rent rises to once a year. Speaking on Insiders, Mr Collins questioned the policy's effectiveness.
Overall, the evidence and data shows that it doesn't work long-term, David. What it shows long-term, in terms of what the experts are telling us, is that it reduces supply. When you look at the evidence that is being cited by others, the evidence shows that it reduces supply significantly by up to 15%. The other thing that it shows is the quality of the stock diminishes over time. So I will look at the data and the evidence, and the data and the evidence says that it doesn't work.
An organisation that pairs Australian hosts with international students says the number of applications from people wanting to host has almost doubled this year. So-called homestays are seen as a way for students to find somewhere to live while also helping families to pay the bills.
Darwin resident Fleur Crow is getting ready to welcome an international student.
It's some income for me, which is good. It helps with some of the bills that I experience.
But more than that, she sees it as a way to help students as they, like so many others, face the tight rental market. She's also inspired by the friendships she made with the international students while at university.
If I can contribute a little bit toward the new students coming to Australia and that bond that they might form with their own friends here and Australian students at the university, I think that's incredible.
Founder of the Australian Homestay Network that pairs up hosts with international students says never before have they received so many applications.
Nationally, we normally would get about 500 host applications every month, but that's rising this year up to almost 1,000 most months on average.
He says it's tax-free income, but he'd like to see the government offer hosts further incentives. While it might not be a direct response, the interest comes after Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe last month called on Australians to increase the number of people in their households as a way to help the economy. But while host families are bridging an accommodation gap, some students say it's not a long-term solution.
Is it possible to make more accommodation for students on campus? It would be more great for a student as well.
Keen to live closer to facilities and where there's better security. Ellen Manfield, ABC News, Darwin.
Sydney Harbour Bridge was a festival of football this morning in celebration of the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, which officially kicks off in 25 days. Host of ABC's The Ticket, Tracy Holmes, spoke to Rhiannon Martin, the head of FIFA Women's World Cup.
What we can expect, first of all, is massive stadiums. We've got some great opportunities here for everyone to come and watch the matches. And I think really the level of football that we're going to see is going to be improving as we go through the tournament.
Well, a little bit earlier, you were with me up on a harbour bridge. It was incredibly windy, 4,000 people celebrating. They released the Unity jersey, which is basically reflective of all the colours of the host countries, Australia and New Zealand, and the landscapes in both of those countries. and a square for each of the 32 nations competing. It's a bigger tournament this time, the first time it's 32 nations for women. What can we expect just from that increase?
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, increasing from 24 to 32 teams is massive for us. We've got 8 brand new teams as well playing, coming from actually all of the different continents as well. So I think what we can expect is to have, just really good quality football. We saw in the Confederations qualifiers last summer how just the level has improved over the last couple of years.
And you've been out, you've looked at all of the venues, you've inspected here in Sydney, across in New Zealand, Brisbane, Melbourne, all of the cities that are hosting events. But what about the players themselves? Because you must have noticed this in 2019. When there are full crowds, when there are full stadiums, when the world has tuned in, which they now do for women's football, what does that do with the performance on the pitch?
Yeah, you're quite right. It's an inspiration, I think, for every player to have got to this stage. It's absolutely massive. I think we will see, hopefully like we saw in the Men's World Cup in Qatar last year, that some of the teams who are performing for the first time will go even better than they were. I mean, we saw what happened with Morocco, what happened with Saudi Arabia in the Men's World Cup. We're hoping to have some surprise results as well. But all of the groups are very strong. I know Australia have got a particularly strong group, but we're just looking forward to some fantastic football kicking off in 25 days.
Yeah, we know that one of the teams that are making their debut here will be the Morocco women's team, and I've seen some shots of some of the facilities that they have been built for them. First time they've qualified, and they outdo some of the men's facilities that I've seen in some parts of Europe. I mean, there's a real investment and there's a real wish, and I think they just want the women to succeed in places that we hadn't heard about before.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the investment that we have seen here in Australia and also in New Zealand has been pretty significant. Our training sites have been upgraded. We've got a very qualified pitch management team who are focused on making sure that the surfaces that are being played on are going to be the best ever. And there's a lot of renovations going on as well here in Australia and New Zealand to leave a legacy behind after the Women's World Cup. So, yeah, it's very exciting. We're delighted to be here.
Now time to get the rest of the day's sport news with Jared Coote.
To separate Australia and England heading into day 4 of the women's test match in Nottingham. Australia has a 92-run lead after dismissing England for 463 in their first innings. Tammy Beaumont was the star for the home side, posting the highest ever score by an English woman, reaching 208, which left England just 10 runs behind the Australians. Beth Mooney and Phoebe Litchfield then put on an unbeaten 82-run stand to end day 3. Irishwoman Leona Maguire has a one-shot lead heading into the final round of the Women's PGA Golf Championship. Maguire shot a 2 par 69 in the third round, set at 7 under for the tournament. The world number 12 fired 5 birdies and 2 bogeys in her round. South Korean Jenny Shins hits a shot further back, shooting a field best 5 under for the day in a bogey-free round. Grace Kim and Gabriella Ruffles are the best both Australians in the tie for 12th, 6 shots off the lead. Essendon's 4-match AFL winning run has come to an end. The Bullets fell to a 32-point defeat against Fremantle in Perth. Dockers kicked 14 goals 9-93 to 9 goals 7-61 in front of over 43,000 fans in Perth. Earlier, the Eagles went down by 171 points to Sydney at the SCG, the 4th biggest defeat in AFL or VFL history. The Swans won 31 goals 19, 205. 5 goals for 34. It was the greatest number of points West Coast have conceded since they entered the competition in 1987. The Adelaide Thunderbirds have booked their spot in the Super Netball Grand Final with a thrilling 64-62 extra time victory over the Swifts in Sydney. Thunderbirds trailed at every change until a 19 goals to 14 final quarter, locked the game at 58 all and forced extra time. Thunderbirds then went on to win the extra period 6 goals to 4 to cap off a dramatic victory. Later on today, the West Coast Fever take on Melbourne Vixens in the minor semi-final.
I can't believe it. I think it's not sunken yet. These girls are just incredible. I think tonight we showed what we can do. Coming from last week and having the win, we knew they were going to come out hard, and they did exactly that. And I'm just so proud of how we all stepped up when we needed to be. I can't believe
In the NRL, the Storm came a slow start to beat Manly 24 points to 6 in Melbourne. The Seagulls took the lead early on in the match, but the Storm scored 6 unanswered tries to seal an 18-point victory that keeps them third on the competition. Later earlier, the Panthers beat the Knights 20 points to 12. That's despite resting all 5 of their State of Origin players, while the first half blitz handed the Eels a 48-20 win against the Dolphins on the Sunshine Coast. Australian Alex de Minaur is through to his second ATP final of the season. The world number 18 beat the world number 6 Olga Rune in straight sets at the Queen's Club tournament. The 24-year-old made 9 unforced errors in the 6-3, 7-6 victory over the second seed. De Minaur will be chasing an 8th silver-level title when he takes on world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz in the final. The Spaniard qualified for his first ATP final on grass by beating Sebastian Korda 6-3, 6-4. The Crusaders have won a 7th straight Super Rugby title, beating the Chiefs 25 points to 20 in the final. Cody Taylor scored the winning try with 7 minutes remaining, handing the Chiefs just their second loss of the season. The Crusaders, who will now lose coach Scott Robinson to the All Blacks job, have won 14 Super Rugby titles in the past 28 years since rugby turned professional.
Around the country, in Queensland, mostly cloudy in north, mostly sunny in the southeast, and sunny and cool in the southwest. To New South Wales and the ACT, mostly sunny in the east and southwest. Snowy Alps, sunny in the northwest. For Victoria, windy with showers in the southwest, mostly sunny in the southeast, cloud increasing in the northwest, shower in the northeast and snow on the Alps. Tasmania, showers in the southeast, snow on the islands, widespread storms elsewhere. Rainy day for South Australia with storms in the southeast and over central parts, mostly sunny in the west and north. For Western Australia, showers easing in the south, mostly sunny and warm in the north. And in the Northern Territory, fog clearing to a sunny day over Arnhem, mostly sunny in the northwest top end, mostly sunny and cool over the interior and the south. Now to our forecast of the capital cities. Windy for Brisbane and Sydney, showers in Canberra and Melbourne, rain for Hobart and Adelaide, mostly sunny in Perth and Darwin. Over the past 28 years, the annual Cockroach Cup has become the race that almost stops the Pilbara city of Karratha. Hundreds of people gather to watch the fastest cockroaches battle it out for the championship. However, there is a slight twist for the winner. Jasmine Chong reports.
Cockroach Cup is held every year here at the Karratha Cats Football Club and has been a tradition for almost 3 decades. Preparations for the race start in the morning with the racing roaches collected from Karratha's finest sewers. They're brought to the football club and allocated the names of local players and club sponsors. The racing roaches are auctioned off to the highest bidder, with the cockroaches fetching anywhere from $5 to $500 each. When it comes to the race itself, the rules are pretty simple. Whichever cockroach reaches the end of the racing track first wins a cash prize. There's a catch. The owner of the winning critter has to eat their roach before they can collect the prize money. Yes, you heard me correctly, they have to eat their prize cockroach. This year's winner was the Vibrator, and its owners Chantel and Simon followed through with the required consumption to collect their winnings.
I said that I would eat the roach, but I did not think that we would win, and I didn't think I was actually going to have to. I didn't think that we were going to win it. No, I didn't think that was going to happen. When I said yes, I was like, oh yeah, I'll eat a roach, but no.
The event raises money for the football club, and based on the success of this year's event, it's fair to say the Karratha Cockroach Cup will be back again next year.
That is the latest from ABC News. Remember, you can also keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Miriam Coral. Stay with us. The World This Week is up next.
This week on News Breakfast, Harrison Ford. He's speaking to us ahead of the highly anticipated release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Lapadia will tell us about his new series, The Black Hand, about a 1930s Italian crime gang.
More advertising than you can poke an algorithm at.
Even banks are promising more. Last time you needed more money when you did a royal commission.
The artificially enhanced new season.
I don't even know if it's in, but that's
Goodman, Wednesday at 30 on ABC TV and ABCIU.
Margot, this is Gertrude when you. So what's the plan? Well, we're going to find rich bits.
And all others, preferably old, so they die soon.
Must be nice. Have a shower and completely jump asses. Should we have showered?
I'm on the top of the win list, getting for the veterans. This chicken.
I need you to listen to me very carefully. The two men who just entered are here to kill you. We have to get you out right now.
We're going away for a while. A surprise holiday.
She has killed me. It's me, new home. The town has everything you need. You'll find there must be a friendly bunch.
Hi.
We go visit her in town.
She's frightened as coming.
That's just going to get worse coming here.
Bit of a mystery.
What is happening?
She's mind her own business.
Helen is full of psychopaths. Get on me, I was thinking things.
Bay Fires, July 16 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Hello and welcome to The World This Week. I'm Beverly O'Connor. Coming up, the desperate search for the Ocean Gate submersible ends in tragedy, with authorities confirming the vessel suffered a catastrophic implosion. Violence flares in the occupied West Bank, with multiple Israelis and Palestinians killed. And thousands turn up to see the World Cup champions Argentina play Indonesia in a football friendly in Jakarta. Well, this week's search for the missing Titanic-bound submersible has ended in tragedy. The US Coast Guard announced the vessel suffered a catastrophic implosion, killing all 5 people on board. The news came after a huge search and rescue effort in the treacherous waters of the Atlantic.
It was hope of a miracle that drove the intense media interest. Now the US Coast Guard has confirmed all hope has gone.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor.
The pieces of the Titan were found scattered across a large debris field, and the press were told that next of kin have been immediately informed.
It's a very difficult question to ask, but it will be an important one for the families, of course. What are the prospects of recovering the bodies of the missing crew?
This is an incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor, and the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. And so we'll continue to work and continue to search the area down there, but I don't have an answer for prospects at this time.
The wreckage lies under the deep, remote waters of the mid-Atlantic, found by high-tech underwater robots, part of what was, to the end, a still-growing, yet increasingly desperate search effort. This video, shot by a Mexican YouTuber, shows it on a previous dive to the Titanic, when questions were already being asked about the uncertified vessel's safety. With the limited air supply, the passengers are bolted in from the outside. The footage taken last year shows that communications were temporarily lost.
No. Yeah. What's weird is I'm getting the pressures, right?
And Paul-Henri Nagelet, former French Navy diver, can also be seen, one of those now lost on this latest disastrous voyage, along with 3 British passengers, the billionaire explorer Hamish Harding, businessman Shahzada were all stacked against the possibility of a rescue.
Violence is flaring in the West Bank. Carried out its first targeted killings in all 20 years, striking a suspected militant with a drone. Earlier, Israeli settlers went on a rampage through a Palestinian mass shooting.
For days, the West besieged by violence. In the latest escalation, hundreds of Palestinian villages, homes and cars. Several Palestinians were wounded and one man was shot dead by security forces.
I told my darling Omar, stay far away from settlers and don't forget your kids.
Residents accused vigilante attacks sparked by the deaths of 4 Israeli settlers who were gunned down by Palestinian militants at a settlement restaurant and petrol station on Tuesday.
We hold the Israeli government fully responsible for a group of reckless settlers. It was mainly done under the protection of the Israeli army.
The citizens of Israel are all obligated to respect the law. We will not accept riots.
But in a move that could further inflame tensions in the occupied region, Mr. Netanyahu also announced plans to build 1,000 new settler homes. And after nightfall, Israel carried out a rare drone strike on a car in the West Bank carrying suspected Palestinian gunmen, reportedly killing 3. This is the first targeted drone strike in the West Bank in nearly 2 decades and marks a major escalation by Israel in its more than year-long campaign against militants in the area. According to Hebrew media, the strike was personally authorised by the Israeli Defence Minister. Hamas has warned it won't go unpunished. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Well, despite the absence of superstar Lionel Messi, a full house of close to 80,000 fans have watched Argentina play for the first time ever in Indonesia. The friendly match was seen as redemptive for football in the country after an awful 12 months for the game. Here's our Indonesia correspondent Bill Birtles, who was at the stadium.
A valiant effort by the Indonesian national team, but as expected, Argentina, the world champions, too strong. And even though it was a bit of a second-string Argentinian side, this stadium was packed. The President Joko Widodo was here, and outside the ground, plenty of people trying to buy tickets from scalpers. Others were just content to sit out here and watch the game on their phones. For many fans, the absence of superstar Lionel Messi and a few other top players hugely disappointing. But others said they were just happy to see the Argentinian team in Indonesia for the first time.
It's been a dream of mine to meet Messi, but it doesn't meant to be. And I bet the people of Indonesia too, maybe 1 million of them, have the same dream as I am. But it just doesn't meant to be.
No Messi tonight. Does that matter for the fans?
No, because I think Argentinian football team that won the World Cup, not Messi alone, although he's the GOAT though. So, I mean, like, we're super excited to see how the team plays, and, you know, everything's not only about Messi.
Indonesia is ranked 149th in the world, so it is seen as a great opportunity to have the world champions playing here in Jakarta. And it has been a really awful 12 months for the game here. Late last year, more than 130 people were killed in a stadium stampede at a club match. And more recently, FIFA stripped this country of hosting rights for the men's Under-20s World Cup because politicians didn't want to let the Israeli team compete in matches here. So for this reason, to have Argentina playing in Jakarta for the first time, it is seen generally, Messi or no Messi, as a big boost for this country's ambitions to be a stronger football nation.
North Korean millennials grew up facing immense hardship in one of the world's most oppressive and isolated regimes. But those who managed to defect to the capitalist South are now using that experience to become successful entrepreneurs. North Asia correspondent James Ocean is in Seoul.
It's the lunchtime rush at this restaurant just outside the South Korean capital. Owner Ju Chung-young is leading the service. The North Korean defector's business is expansive. There's a cafe, a wellness centre, and she sells jewellery on the side. It's a far cry from growing up in the famine-plagued north.
In North Korea, life was a challenge. It was a life and death challenge.
Millions died of hunger in the mid-1990s, a period known as the arduous march. To survive, people set up a type of black market called Jangmyeong, trading whatever goods they could.
The North Korean economy was one of the most demonetized, most tightly controlled, government-planned economies of the 20th century. But with the famine of the 1990s, that government control system and government provision system broke down and meant that North Korean people had to defend themselves.
Chung-young learned the ways of the black market from her mother.
I was able to earn enough not to starve to death and make money.
Like many of her generation, she's proud of that resilience.
In South Korea, people seem to live in fear of breaking a stable life or safe job. But I like being adventurous and trying new things. And I think it's because of my past. I'm not afraid to start new things. And even if I fail, I think positively that I had a good experience.
The Jangmyeong generation, the North Korean millennials, they grew up from an early age relying on themselves. And so they identify themselves as different culturally from their parents' generation. And in general, they seem to be more individualistic, more outward-looking, more ambitious in some ways, more creative.
At a market in Seoul, Park Yosep buys fresh produce for his two cafes. As a young boy in North Korea, he traded mushrooms with the Chinese to feed his family.
A lot of people, they like go to mountain and catch some vegetables or like wood and then selling to the market. That's how people survive.
North Korea has been suffering from the worst food shortages and malnutrition since the 1990s. A mix of bad policy, pandemic, sanctions, and Pyongyang's military splurge are to blame. Making matters worse is the regime has a much firmer grasp on the population, meaning it will be harder for a black market economy to survive or for people to escape.
And so there's increased hardship just, in absolute terms in the economy, but then there's increased repression at the same time.
I escaped 10 years ago. I don't think you could compare it to now. At the time I escaped, many people were defecting from North Korea, so the escape route was active. Since coronavirus, North Korea's controls have been severe, and the situation is not good.
Making the most of a second chance in Seoul. James Ocean, ABC News, Seoul.
The President of Honduras has ordered sweeping changes to the penal system after 46 women were killed in a prison battle earlier this week. The military police will take charge of most prisons and gang leaders will be sent to new prison islands well offshore.
Emotions erupt outside a women's prison in the Honduran town of Tamara. Reports that dozens of inmates were killed during a massive riot and fire inside prompted relatives to surround the facility demanding answers, only to be stonewalled by authorities.
They haven't told us anything. We've been waiting to hear what happened inside. I don't know if my cousin is alive. I just don't know.
We want to know who is alive, the human beings, their family. We want to see them and know if they're okay. We want answers. We're in pain. They could be dead already and we don't know anything.
According to reports, a brawl had broken out between rival gangs in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Investigators say most of those killed were burned to death, with the remainder either shot or stabbed. 7 women were rushed to hospital with gunshot and knife wounds as authorities worked to identify the mass of bodies.
Not providing us with any information. Until forensic experts come, they won't be able to tell us anything. But we're still here.
Earlier this year, the Honduran government formed a commission aimed to retake control of prisons run by gangs and crooked officials. The Honduran president insists inmates had planned the riot with the knowledge of guards and promised drastic action as a result.
The Honduran people must know we will not allow any efforts against organised crime to be sabotaged. Organised crime has hijacked our country's penitentiary system. It's trying to cause fear and failure among authorities. We will not give in.
A government declaring war on gangs driven by power, the makings of an even more volatile environment for prisoners and their families. Manny Sigas, ABC News.
Villagers in the Philippines are risking their lives, refusing to leave the foothills of a volcano at risk of a major eruption. The world's most iconic volcano, Mayon, is oozing lava, triggering evacuation orders.
In the shadow of the beast, police patrol the streets, searching for anyone remaining. Residents of this village were evacuated last week when lava started spewing from the volcano. But not everyone heeded the warning.
I'm not scared, but outsiders will probably have a heart attack if they live here.
Delphina snuck back, begging authorities for a few moments to collect her daughter's school uniform and feed her pigs.
I'm scared, sir. A boulder rolled down with a sound like thunder.
Entry into this region has long been prohibited, lying well within the 6-kilometre danger zone. But thousands of poor villagers rely on this fertile land, and for them, there's little choice. Eddie lost relatives when they were struck by boulders and ash after a sudden explosion in 1993.
It just suddenly exploded at 12 noon. That is why a lot of people were killed.
There have been more than 50 eruptions since the 17th century, one which buried an entire village. This time, the government isn't taking any chances. It's evacuated 20,000 people so far, and that could more than double if the eruptions turn violent. Authorities believe that could happen within days, and if it does, superheated gas and debris will be flung down the mountainside, consuming anything in its path. Those remaining are gambling with their lives. Cameron Nichols, ABC News.
Militants linked to the Islamic State group are being blamed for a school massacre of at least 41 people, mostly children, and the abduction of 6 students in western Uganda. It's the country's worst such attack in years, and just a warning that this story does contain distressing details of the attack.
A community in shock, reeling after a deadly raid that turned a boarding school of 60 students into a killing field. Students were in their dormitory beds when the armed militants attacked their school. This 16-year-old student says they hid under their beds when the shooting started, saying they set fire to the building while they were inside.
They murdered 22 students from this school and then threw a bomb in a hostel that also killed 17 students.
The students were hacked or shot to death as they tried to flee. 6 were kidnapped. Those who escaped have been left injured and traumatised. The army has been called in, but locals say it's too little, too late.
They are telling us the borders are secured. Security is tight. I want the security to tell us where they were when these killers came.
Security is a collaborative work. Why do you people keep quiet when you see strangers? Right now, we have deployed planes in various places to hunt them down.
Authorities say the attackers are from the IS-linked Allied Defence Forces, which has been trying to violently overthrow the country's longtime president, Yoweri Museveni. The UN has condemned the latest attack, calling it an appalling act of violence, and for those behind it to be brought to justice. Jenny Lavelle, ABC News.
Temperatures in northern and eastern India have reached 46 degrees as the country struggles under a deadly heat wave. But in other parts of the country, Mother Nature has unleashed flooding. Here's Mieta Adams.
Overcrowded wards and overstretched staff. A grim scene in Uttar Pradesh's Balia district, where hospitals are swamped with an influx of heat stroke patients.
I had pain in my chest, fever and a headache. It was because of the heat.
It's consistently reached over 40 degrees here for the past couple weeks, and severe power shortages are making matters worse. Reports say up to 170 people have died in the country. At least 54 of those between Thursday and Sunday were in Balia alone, despite other areas also feeling the heat. Those at the local crematoriums are noticing an increase in demand.
On normal days, we used to get 10 to 15 bodies for cremation. However, due to heat stroke, the situation has changed in the last 4 to 5 days. The number has doubled and reached 25 to 30 bodies in a day.
The chief medical official at the main state hospital in Balia has been fired for saying that the deaths were due to heat, which a government official called an irresponsible statement. It's led to a political dispute as the government investigates whether the surge of deaths is in fact caused by heat. While Balia is dealing with intense heat, just 300 kilometres west, the first monsoon rains have hit the city of Gurugram. The sudden floods are causing huge traffic disruptions, and people are criticising the government for not doing enough to prevent the flooding.
The situation is so bad here as the water has not been pumped out and we are not provided with any solution. The government officials often give us false promises every year, but nothing is done about it.
More rain is predicted in what continues to be a rollercoaster year of weather in India. Mieta Adams, ABC News.
It's at least 2 weeks since Ukrainian troops began a concerted effort to push back Russian defensive lines in the south and east of the country. And Operation Kiev hopes might eventually result in the liberation of large parts of territory. The BBC joined Ukraine's 68th Jaeger Brigade as its combat forces fanned out eastwards, having recently regained the village of Blahodatna.
The struggle to take back what's theirs has begun in earnest. This was Russian-held ground 2 weeks ago. For Three Storm Brigade, the journey to the front takes longer now. Here in the east and in the south, there's still a long way to go. Ukraine is on the offensive. Russia fought hard to keep this ground, but Three Storm fought harder. We travelled 130 kilometres southwest from Three Storm's position to a second area of Ukrainian attack, where the 68th Brigade have captured a pocket of territory, and on to the east of the village of Blahodatny. Here, Company Commander Andrei Onistrat is giving the orders.
Diesel, it's very important. You need to listen to people. Listen closely and do everything they tell you. And smile. Why are you so serious? You're winning this war.
But winning comes at a price. The men fought Russian Marines for 3 days to take this village. There were many casualties.
Here is very difficult, because this is main area of activity for Russian soldiers.
And we can see here, it looks like it's been fighting house to house, room by room, very close.
Yeah, this is very difficult. Every kilometers is very difficult.
And everywhere we walk,
I know how many people we lose, but I cannot tell you.
There's more Russian corpses over here.
Russian soldiers. 1, 2, 3.
Despite the pain involved in capturing this village, the men won't linger here. They're already packing up and ready for the next offensive. This specialised unit has a key role in the next imminent attack. While artillery sounds all around them, they have to move fast to get closer still to Russian positions. The cost of this fight is everywhere to see. Destroyed Western-built armour litters the battlefield. But Russia too has lost dozens of tanks and vehicles since this offensive began. On a hot day east of Blahodatny, the Ukrainian attack begins. The battle won, the danger is far from over. As we make our way back from the trenches, more Russian artillery fire targets Andrei's convoy. We need to move fast. And the 49-year-old commander carries an extra burden, the memory of his son.
This helmet of my son. A little bit smaller for me, but this is like remember. This like remember.
This was 21-year-old Ostap, filmed the day before his death. He fought on the same front lines as his father. 2 days before the counter-offensive began, he was killed by a Russian drone. It's cost a lot. It's been especially hard for you. You lost your son. Can you tell us a bit about your son, please?
Він хотів бути героєм для мене.
He wanted to be a hero for me.
І він хотів бути
He wanted to be a hero for me, and he succeeded.
Я хотів його оберігати,
I wanted to
а
protect
він
him,
хотів бути героєм. І
but
він
he
виграв.
wanted to be a hero. And he won.
Ukraine may yet win back its land, but there is much here that will never be recovered.
A royal tradition has been revived during the first birthday parade for new monarch King Charles. The lavish spectacle, Trooping the Colour, was treated to an appearance by the sovereign riding in on horseback for the first time in decades. But the pomp and pageantry proved a little too loud for some of the younger members of the royal family.
The pageantry of a new era. And for the king, a lot of firsts. His first birthday parade, and the first monarch to be on horseback at Trooping the Colour since 1986. He was followed by Prince William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and other members of the royal family down the Mall, with London in all its ceremonial glory.
On days like today, you understand the full meaning of grand.
At the Horse Guards Parade, the King inspected the military spectacle that's been held since 1760, although his horse appeared a little skittish. Princes George and Louis and Princess Charlotte were taken to watch from a window. Queen Camilla, dressed in honour of the Grenadier Guards, which she took over as Colonel-in-Chief, and the Princess of Wales in green. She's Colonel of the Irish Guards. The first trip of the colour without the Queen, but this event is constant in the royal calendar. Afterward, they returned to Buckingham Palace. The royal family gathered on balconies to watch the flypast that couldn't take place at the coronation last month because of the rain. Royal Air Force fighter jets spelling out the King's initials, a symbol of bond between the new monarch and the military. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
That is the programme. You can always watch the show on iView, and there are more world news and interviews at the ABC's YouTube channel. And do join me on the World Weeknights. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.
From Housing Commission.
I think growing up poor was the formative experience of my life.
The constitutional lawyer.
She carried the Constitution around when she was a kid, which is just weird.
I just remember thinking it was really super cool.
Megan Davis's dream to give her people a voice. Megan is going to hold
feel tired. I feel optimistic.
On Australian Story tomorrow.
We have a massive issue.
Australia's biggest tax scam.
There were Porsches, there were BMWs, there was an aircraft.
They set up, gloated about it, manipulated people. How they did it.
Who are we going to lend this money to?
This is going to tell us that they knew exactly what was going on.
And how it fell apart.
Man, how are you going to move the money? Everything's gone. The money's gone.
Four Corners, tomorrow, ABC TV and ABC iView. Anthony LaPaglia is on a personal journey.
This is the story of a gang that terrorised the cane fields of North Queensland for over a decade.
Unearthing Australia's secret history.
At the core of mafia behaviour is greed.
Extortion, threats, intimidating witnesses.
A criminal secret society which is connected to Club Brits.
It's hard to imagine this place is at the heart of their criminal activities.
The Black Hand starts Tuesday 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Comedian Joel Christie swapping punchlines for puppies.
What would you like? You want a fin? You want the Jennifer Aniston? You want Parrot?
He's on a rescue mission to help House in Pounds find their forever homes.
She saved me as well. We saved each other.
In a new series, he'll fetch a lot of love.
Oh, he loves you.
And some barking mad moments.
Sit.
New Leash on Life. Starts Tuesday, July 4 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Today, negotiated end to Russia's mercenary revolt. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin ends his occupation of a provincial capital and accepts exile in Belarus. Also ahead, Canada launches a joint investigation with the US Coast Guard into the loss of the Titan submersible. An urgent warning issued with 2 dams at high risk of failure after a week of heavy rain in Adelaide. And thousands march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge celebrating 25 days to the Women's World Cup. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Korowa. A short-lived mutiny against the Russian government has come to a negotiated end. Wagner mercenaries, which had been threatening to march on Moscow, have backed down after a deal brokered by Belarus. Just 24 hours ago, the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, had declared a rebellion against the Russian Ministry of Defense, accusing Russian forces of firing on his troops. Now he's left the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, cheered on by crowds. The city had come under the private army's control when its troops left Ukraine. But Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko intervened, brokering a deal to call off the rebellion.
They wanted to disband the Wagner military company. We embarked on a march of justice. In 24 hours, we got to within 200 kilometers of Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of our fighters' blood. Now the moment has come when blood could be spilled. Understanding responsibility for the chance that Russian blood will be spilled on one side, we are turning our columns around and going back to field camps as planned.
Under the agreement, the Kremlin has dropped all charges against Prigozhin, who will leave Russia and head to Belarus. Ukraine's president says the incident shows Russia is in chaos.
Today is a day when there should definitely be no silence. Today, the world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. Complete chaos. Complete absence of any predictability. And it is happening on Russian territory, which is fully loaded with weapons.
Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has made a statement saying Australia is closely monitoring developments in Russia, adding the federal government will continue to condemn Russia's immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Global Affairs editor John Lyons has more on the situation in Russia and the implications for Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine.
I think it's a high-stakes chess game. This is not the end of the story by any means. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a very smart operator. Sometimes people underestimate him. You don't go from being in jail. I mean, who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? He was in jail when he was 20. As an 18-year-old, he got into crime. He had a tough childhood. 20, he's sentenced to jail for 12, 13 years for robbery and fraud. He then leaves jail, becomes a hot dog salesman, then does well at that, opens a restaurant, does well at that, he knew Vladimir Putin from St. Petersburg, starts getting contracts to cater for the army and for the elite, ends up a billionaire oligarch who basically faced down yesterday the man he used to serve nice meals to. So I think that where this goes next is Yevgeny Prigozhin. They got to the edge of the conflict. They did a deal. Putin didn't want to have the fight. We can see on the picture on the screen now the scenes like a rock star. You know, the warmth, the hugging. He was like a hero. No one tried to arrest him. Security forces didn't detain him. This is a man who has just said that Vladimir Putin has conducted an entire war based on a lie. This is a man who has said that the chief general who drove it did it because he wanted another star on his lapel, so when he laid in his coffin on a nice pillow, he'd have a nicer uniform. So he's gone all out attacking them. He now goes to Belarus. That's the deal. And they came back from the brink of civil war. But I think he will sit in Belarus and plot. The generals, the oligarchs will all now realise that Putin is a weakened figure.
So does bringing Belarus into the picture take some of the pressure, though, off Vladimir Putin? Is that the way that they've had to de-escalate this?
It solves the immediate pressure. We've seen pictures in the last few hours of the Russians, the forces, security people were digging up roads. They had bulldozers digging up the highways that led to Moscow to try to stop the Wagner people getting to Moscow. They got to within 200 kilometres. They were 2 hours drive away. So it shows you not a single soldier tried to stop Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner people. I think for Vladimir Putin, that would be what he'd be reeling about now. He'd be stunned by the fact no one tried to stop him. They were getting a hero's welcome. So the problem doesn't go away for Vladimir Putin. He is in a lot of trouble.
It buys him a little bit of time, but my next question is, now that we have Prigozhin going to Belarus, Wagner troops now retreating back into Ukraine, what do we anticipate will be the chain of command there?
I think that he'll pull the troops out of Ukraine. I don't think they'll stay there. I think now it's in his interests, Prigozhin's interest, now that he's declared his hand, that the war fails. So I think that's the end of Wagner's fighting, and they've been crucial. They have held Bakhmut and done all sorts of things. And so it weakens the Russian army. And so Prigozhin's, dream plan in a way would be the war fails, Putin's in trouble, they're looking for a charismatic leader who's got the cred. He's got a lot of credibility, Prigozhin, and with the Russian army and with the Russian people. He's very popular. People like him. He's blunt talking. He's been in the trenches. Yesterday, his reason for doing this deal with Belarus is, I didn't want any Russian blood spilt. It's a good line. I mean, it's a very smart political line. Putin would have spilt blood, Russian blood, that's the implication. He didn't want it, so he's done this deal. So he's gone right into the lion's cage. He's looked the lion in the eye, and we can see him there. He's straight talking. The Russian government has tried to stop him appearing on Russian television over the last year. There's been a ban on some television stations even having him on. Putin's threatened by him, but has needed him. So it's an intriguing relationship between these two who've known each other 25 years. They know each other's measure, and I think Prigozhin's playing a blinder of a game. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
And the Kremlin has also dropped that criminal investigation. So what does that tell you?
Well, it says that I think that it's a capitulation by the Kremlin, that they were surprised by, the audacity of Prigozhin to pull his troops out of Ukraine, to go to Rostov-on-Don, to take control of all of the military facilities in the headquarters of what was running the Ukraine war, then say, I'm coming to Moscow. They then get in their cars and their convoys. They then, go off and take Voronezh. They take a second town, control of that. So the message from him is, we go where we want to. Nobody stops him. The Ukrainians haven't been able to kill him. The Russian army haven't been able to stop him. So it gives him this sort of status in a country that appreciates and values its military and its strong men. It gives Prigozhin a really big launching pad. I think at some point he's looking for that political career to be a president. When Putin falls, there'll be a scramble for who takes over. He's now in the sort of box seat.
So, as you say there, Vladimir Putin's authority is completely, undermined by these developments. What do you anticipate might be going on there in terms of the political power plays, the allegiances that are being drawn up there?
Well, yesterday we saw the speech of Putin. That was not sort of your classic confident Putin. So I think there'll be a lot of people who've been watching this catastrophic war for Ukraine. It's been a disaster for Russia in every sense. The thousands of young Russian lives that have been lost needlessly, the destruction of their neighbour, the international sanctions, the oligarchs have had all their yachts and apartments in France and other places frozen. So I think now there'll be plenty of people sitting there plotting. If they've got a chance to get Vladimir Putin, they will. I think someone will strike at some point. It's a matter of working out the coalitions, the private armies. You've got this sort of chessboard of the Gazprom private army of 50,000, Wagner's got 25,000, someone else has got 20,000. How do you stitch together an alliance, get the right people in the inner circle and then strike? I think that now it's a matter of Putin will be watching not just the cups of tea that he drinks, as he's convinced someone's trying to poison him, but I think he'll be watching every person around him.
Now, taking that chess analogy a little further, we had Prigozhin targeting, in particular, the Defence Minister Shoigu and the military commander Gerasimov. Are we anticipating any changes in terms of Russia's military command?
I don't think Putin could do it at the moment because it looked like he was bound to Prigozhin. But Putin has been often getting rid of a national security advisor or the people running the campaign in Ukraine. He's dispatched a lot of them, sacked them. And so each time he sacks someone like that, he gets another high-powered, powerful enemy there. So in a way now, he's got that little Praetorian Guard around him of people who will protect him, the ex-KGB people, the people he trusts, but the waters are lapping up at the edge of him. And I think that at some point, he's got a meeting with Destiny, he's going to meet his own fate. And he realised yesterday that could come close.
North America correspondent Barbara Miller takes us through how the situation has been received in the US.
President Joe Biden delayed slightly his departure from the White House today to the retreat Camp David. He was briefed, first of all, here on the unfolding situation in Russia. We understand the Vice President was also at the briefing, and what the White House is telling us is that the President and Vice President will continue to be regularly briefed on what's happening. The National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has also now travelled to Camp David. He was due to head to Europe. He's cancelled that trip. And we're also hearing that the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, has cancelled his overseas travel. President Biden held a call with the leaders of the UK, France and Germany. His Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also held calls with key allies, as did the Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin. So very much the message from here is everyone's across it, everyone's talking to key allies and will continue to do so. We were told that on that call between President Biden, the UK, Germany and France, they reiterated their unwavering support for Ukraine. And you can be sure the White House is assessing how these developments in Russia, how this internal dispute might play out for Ukraine's counter-offensive in Ukraine, whether the internal strife there will give Ukraine some kind of window of opportunity. There's also some reporting in the Wall Street Journal that planned sanctions on the Wagner Group, which of course isn't only active in Ukraine, that some planned sanctions to do with their other activities in Africa are being put on hold because the White House does not want to be seen to be taking sides as this plays out. So I think what we're going to see over the coming hours, at least from the White House, is really just a sense that they're briefing, that everyone's across all events, but we're not going to see President Biden, for example, come out and make any kind of statement. I think perhaps it was best summed up by the former President Donald Trump. He took to his social media platform and he said it's a real mess what's happening in Russia right now, but be careful what you wish for. Next in could be far worse.
Canadian investigators have begun an inquiry into the Titan submersible, which imploded last week during a deep dive to the wreckage of the Titanic. Police and safety inspectors boarded the support ship, the Polar Prince, after it returned to port in Newfoundland. Canadian authorities have begun interviewing the crew to help determine what caused the tragedy. The chair of Canada's Transportation Safety Board, Kathy Fox, says the board is working with the US Coast Guard to determine if any criminal charges should be laid.
We take the time we need to do a thorough investigation, and we're in the early stages, and we need to scope out the lines of inquiry. Typically, our investigations can take 18 months to 2 years. We obviously try and do them quicker because we know everybody wants answers, particularly the family, the public, etc. But we need to take the time. Our mandate is to investigate from a safety perspective, identify what happened, why, and what can be done to reduce the risk of it happening in the future.
Today marks 1 year since the US Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, ending the constitutional right to abortion in the United States. Since then, 14 states have passed near total bans on the practice. In many others, the fight over abortion access is still taking place. President Joe Biden says he will veto a national ban if Congress moves to implement one.
We've seen the devastating effects all across the country. Women turned away from emergency rooms, denied life-saving care. Moms, college students, teachers, nurses, traveling hundreds of miles to get basic reproductive health care. You know, and since that dark June day last year, each of you has worked tirelessly to fight back. And the Dobbs decision, the court practically dared the women of America to be heard. This is the majority road. Women are not without electoral or political power. You ain't seen nothing yet, court.
A second dam failure warning has been issued by the South Australian State Emergency Service, this time for the Adelaide Hills. It says the dam could threaten the safety of residents along Lobethal Road between Basket Range and Ashton. Meanwhile, roads are still blocked around a dam also at risk of failing south of Adelaide. The dam at Hope Forest could be a risk to several properties in the area. More severe weather is lashing the region today. Nationals leader David Littleproud has played down suggestions his position in the party is under threat. Anonymous Nationals MPs have criticised Mr Littleproud's leadership in News Corp papers. Their concerns include allegations the Queensland MP has a reputation for losing his temper at colleagues and staff. Mr Littleproud told Channel 9 he's not worried about a potential leadership spill.
We're all on borrowed time in politics. Don't worry about that, no matter your political party. Look, a couple of bruised egos. Look, it's the quest of the party room, and I've never taken anything for granted being the leader. It's the greatest honour I've ever been given to lead the party that I joined 25 years ago.
Funerals for the victims of the New South Wales Hunter Valley bus crash will begin from tomorrow. 28-year-old Angus Craig will be farewelled by family and friends at a memorial service near Nowra on the state's south coast. 10 people were killed in the crash while several others were injured when the bus rolled at Greta early this month. Thousands of people have flocked to Sydney Harbour to walk, jog or dance across the bridge to mark the countdown to the FIFA Women's World Cup. With 25 days to go until the official kick-off, the public event aims to embrace unity, inclusivity and, of course, love for the game. The first World Cup game will be between Australia and the Republic of Ireland on the 20th of July. An organisation that pairs Australian hosts with international students says the number of applications from people wanting to host has almost doubled this year. So-called homestays are seen as a way for students to find somewhere to live while also helping families to pay the bills.
Darwin resident Fleur Crow is getting ready to welcome an international student.
It's some income for me, which is good. It helps with some of the bills that I experience.
But more than that, she sees it as a way to help students as they, like so many others, face the tight rental market. She's also inspired by the friendships she made with international students while at university.
If I can contribute a little bit towards new students coming to Australia and that bond that they might form with their own friends here and Australian students at the university. I think that's incredible.
Founder of the Australian Homestay Network that pairs up hosts with international students says never before have they received so many applications.
Nationally, we normally would get about 500 host applications every month, but that's rising this year up to almost 1,000 most months on average.
He says it's tax-free income, but he'd like to see the government offer hosts further incentives. While it might not be a direct response, the interest comes after Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe last month called on Australians to increase the number of people in their households as a way to help the economy. But while host families are bridging an accommodation gap, some students say it's not a long-term solution.
Is it possible to make more accommodation for students on campus? It would be more great for the student as well.
Keen to live closer to facilities and where there's better security. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Darwin.
A growing number of young Australians are refusing to go to school. Attendance rates are dropping in public, private and independent schools, prompting a Senate inquiry into refusal rates in 2022. The cause, however, is complicated. But one school in Melbourne is at capacity and exists just for people who can't find their way in traditional education systems.
Serving up food for classmates, Sam doesn't look like he suffers from intense school phobia, but he does.
I was kind of a lot of anxiety and all that.
Or at least he did.
Now I'm like, yeah, let me in.
School reluctance or school phobia is a growing problem nationally. Attendance levels have dropped from 91% to 84%, with many saying the pandemic exacerbated existing problems.
Particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, where there were extended lockdowns and remote learning.
My attendance was pretty bad. I think I was in the low 30s.
Kaylee has ADHD, fell behind and was overwhelmed.
It just kind of felt a little bit lonely. I feel like they didn't really understand what it felt like to kind of be drowning and work like that.
I'm going to put some images up on the screen.
But like Sam, she's reinvigorated by the Hester Hornbrook Academy.
Yeah, so centimetres, cool.
It's dedicated to helping those who can't attend traditional schools by creating understanding and community.
We have students in our class who haven't, prior to coming here, they haven't left their bedrooms for months at a time, have been at school for 2 days in the past year. So we've got extreme behavioural issues.
There are fresh, hot meals cooked on site and an open pantry. Lawyers for students, free haircuts, school psychologists. Classes start later. Each has a teacher, youth worker and education intervention specialist for bespoke care.
This is another example of making school accessible no matter who you are. This classroom for toys is for new parents here. Mum or dad with a child, 18 months or under, can bring their child into class with them so the parent can continue their education and the child gets what they need well.
Anything right from food, clothing, shelter to education is provided.
And while not every school can do this, experts say creating reliable support structures are essential.
To make students feel like school is a safe place, that behaviour is well managed, the classrooms aren't too disruptive.
76% of Hester Hornbrook students want to get a job, apprenticeship, or further education, like Zara.
It was just a safe space to be there. Everyone here, I think, is just really trying to get an education and learn.
Success inspires success. Both Sam and Kaylee are planning on careers in hospitality or animal care. Iskandar Razak, ABC News, Melbourne.
And now for late sport news with Jared Hoot.
To separate Australia and England heading into day 4 of the women's test match in Nottingham. Australia had a 92-run lead after dismissing England for 463 in their first innings. Tony Beaumont was the star for the home side, posting the highest ever score by an English woman, reaching 208, which left England just 10 runs behind the Australians. Beth Mooney and Phoebe Litchfield then put on an unbeaten 82-run stand to end day 3. Irishwoman Leona Maguire has a one-shot lead heading into the final round of the Women's PGA Golf Championship. Maguire shot a 2 past 69 in the third round, so it's 7 for the tournament. Well, no, 12-5-5, but he's in 2 bogeys in her round. South Korean Jenny Shins hits a shot for the back, shooting a field best 5 under the day in a bogey-free round. Grace Kim and Gabriella Ruffles are the best placed Australians in a tie for 12th, 6 shots off the lead. Essendon's 4-match AFL winning run has come to an end. The Bombers fell to a 32-point defeat against Fremantle in Perth. The Dockers kicked 14 goals, 9-93 to 9 goals, 7-61 in front of over 43,000 fans in Perth. Earlier, the Eagles went down by 171 points to Sydney at the SCG, the 4th biggest defeat in AFL or VFL history. Swans won 31 goals, 19, 205 to 5 goals for 34. It was the greatest number of points West Coast conceded since they entered the competition in 1987. The Adelaide Thunderbirds have booked their spot in the Super Netball Grand Final with a thrilling 64-62 extra time victory over the Swifts in Sydney. The Thunderbirds trailed at every change until a 19-14 final quarter locked the game at 58 all and forced extra time. The Thunderbirds then went on to win the extra period 6-4 to cap off a dramatic victory. Later on today, the West Coast Fever take on the Melbourne Vixens in the minor semi-final.
It's not something yet. These girls are just incredible. I think tonight we showed what we can do. From last week and having the win, we knew they were going to come out hard, and they did exactly that. And I'm just so proud of how we all stepped up when it needed to be. And I believe we're in the final.
In the NRL, the Storm overcame a slow start to beat Manly 24 points to 6 in Melbourne. The Seagulls took the lead early on in the match, but the Storm scored 6 unanswered tries, still an 18-point victory that keeps them third on the competition. Earlier, the Panthers beat the Knights 20 points to 12. That's despite resting all 5 of their State of Origin players, while the first half blitz handed the Eels 48-20 win against the Dolphins on the Sunshine Coast. Australian Alex de Minaur is through to his second ATP final of the season. The world number 18 beat the world number 6 Olga Rune in straight sets of the Queen's Club tournament. The 24-year-old made just 9 unforced errors in the 6-3, 7-6 victory over the second seed. De Minaur will be chasing an 8th tour-level title when he takes on world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz in the final. The Spaniard qualified for his first ATP final on grass by beating Sebastian Korda 6-3, 6-4. The Crusaders have won a 7th straight Super Rugby title, beating the Chiefs 25 points to 20 in the final. Cody Taylor scored a winning try with 7 minutes remaining, handing the Chiefs just their second loss of the season. The Crusaders, who will now lose coach Scott Robinson to the All Blacks job, have won 14 Super Rugby titles in the past 28 years since rugby turned professional.
Looking around the country, in Queensland, mostly cloudy in the north, mostly sunny in the southeast, and sunny and cool in the southwest. To New South Wales and the ACT, mostly sunny in the east and southwest. Snow on the Alps, sunny in the northwest. For Victoria, windy with showers in the southwest, mostly sunny in the southeast, cloud increasing in the northwest, a shower in the northeast and snow on the Alps. To Tasmania, showers in the southeast, snow on highlands, widespread storms elsewhere. A rainy day for South Australia with storms in the southeast and over central parts, mostly sunny in the west and north. For Western Australia, showers easing in the south, mostly sunny and warm in the north. And in the Northern Territory, full clearing to a sunny day over Arnhem, mostly sunny in the northwest top end, mostly sunny and cool over the interior and the south. Now tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities. Windy for Brisbane and Sydney, showers in Canberra and Melbourne, rain for Hobart and Adelaide, mostly sunny in Perth and Darwin. That is the latest from ABC News. Remember, you can also keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Miriam Collower, thank you for your company.
Australia. Unbelievable.
He's not happy. The correct way to address me is not hey.
So rude.
Catherine Tate ruled in Queen of Oz. Stream it now on ABC iView.
This week on News Breakfast, Harrison Ford. He's speaking to us ahead of the highly anticipated release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
And speaking of star power, Ant Philip Harlow will tell us about his new series, Black Hand, about a 1930s Italian crime gang.
I need you to listen to me. Do mean are here to kill. We have to get you out now. Going away for a while. Surprise holiday. That's completely awesome. If town has everything you need, you'll find that mostly have a lunch. We have a very intelligent.
She's frightened so much.
Just going to give us coming here. The town is full of psychopaths.
She's mind her own business.
Bay of Fires starts July 16 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
City has been in lockdown.
G'day. Every one of us, at some stage, is hit with a realisation that while life has lots of dreadful and amazing moments, it's often pretty hard, rarely black and white. Some people learn that lesson young, while others who are a bit luckier cruise along for a while before figuring it out. Hugh Van Geilenberg has a hit podcast about embracing your imperfection and becoming more resilient. But it took a deep and difficult look at his own family's complexities for him to truly understand how hard resilience can be to find.
This kind of was my dream as a kid. I wanted to talk in front of people and no idea how it was going to happen. It'd be amazing, really. To be doing the Opera House, it kind of feels like it's official. This is a proper job that I've got.
It feels huge tonight. Just to think that he's now selling out the Opera House, it's pretty amazing.
I say I'm nervous now, but give me 20 minutes and it might be a different story. And I don't say that everywhere I go. I promise. I was in Canberra a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't.
One of the things I think audiences love about Hugh, that I love about Hugh, like it's just his real honesty and his ability to very quickly tap into how he's feeling.
This is a story about when I met my hero, Hamish Blake. Sitting in a cafe, and Hamish turned around and he said, "G'day mate, how you going?" And it happened. I just went. That was it.
He's a very funny dude.
And the next moment, I just high-fived him in the fist. And I got so awkward, I just grabbed his fist and started.
Well, he is very close to comedy because, the best comedy is honest.
I just want to say right now, for anyone right now who's sitting in this incredible auditorium who is going through a rough patch right now, I don't know how you'd categorise me or what I do. Self-help always makes me cringe. The word well-being, I feel a bit comfortable with. I don't know why. I'm not a psychologist. I guess I'm a teacher and I'm a storyteller. That's my little sister, Georgia. It's an extraordinary story of hope and resilience. I started the Resilience Project because I didn't want other families to go through what we went through as a family growing up with my sister's challenges with mental health. Fast forward a few years, Georgia's in hospital and I kind of had worked out by then this was really serious.
I believe in what he's doing and I believe that it is so important that this story gets told. But it was just so strange that he was talking to thousands of people about it all the time and we'd never talked.
Fast forward another few years, she's still struggling another few years. It was much easier to get up in front of 3,000 people and tell our story than it was to sit down face to face with her and have that conversation. It was just too hard. Thank you so much for coming. It's just been a very, very special night. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the night.
small little hey. 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 How you going? Good. How are you? Good. You skate here?
How's it work?
Do you know what?
I do.
You've got the same thing in your tooth from yesterday.
You joking?
Well, it's in the same position.
Well, that makes sense.
I think it was 2019 we started making the podcast. It's called The Imperfects.
I felt like I was pretending to like things that mothers should like.
We get people on who have had huge success in their respective areas, but talk to them about what was really going on behind the scenes and try and break down that myth of perfection and celebrate the fact that we're all imperfect.
I was running myself ragged to do the school lunches, which are shithouse boring.
I just went, you know what? Let go. And I'm proud of the fact that I did.
The Imperfects is about exactly that, about coming from a standpoint of going, the whole point is we're not experts and we're not perfect.
It's hard to make adult friends, right?
Yeah.
We're all crippled by insecurities.
Yeah.
It was a really fun, enjoyable project to work on with Ryan and with Josh, my brother. And then when COVID hit, it became something so much more profound for me.
The tricky thing that he had to navigate during COVID was everyone was turning to him for help, thinking that he'll be fine.
And then we did an episode where I just came out and said, I'm finding things very difficult at the moment. I love my job. I'm so lucky to do what I do. But at the moment, I'm finding it overwhelming. I've never felt so emotionally drained and physically tired in my entire life. Well, I think I felt great pressure to, as the resilience person, to always be okay. This was the first time that I just actually sort of let down the, I don't know, curtain just to say, no, I'm not, I don't have everything sorted. The idea of embracing imperfection, it was life-changing for me.
Good shot, Hugh.
I'm the eldest. George is 3 years younger than me. And then my little brother Josh is 6 years younger than me. I was a very lucky kid. Grew up in the inner eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and I just had the happiest childhood. It was cricket in the backyard in summer, and it was football in the backyard in winter, and that's kind of what I remember.
Hugh and Georgia would be entertaining us every week, putting on little performances in the house, and I'd play roles. I couldn't really think of more loving brothers and sisters than those two.
Every Christmas, we spent the entire day watching the new stand-up comedy video by Billy Connolly and like quoting it for the rest of the year. Laughter was just a part of what we did. But underneath that all, there was a much deeper sadness going on for me. I went through puberty very early, like got my first underwire bra in 4th grade. Like that's not a winning situation for anyone. And so when my body started presenting as a female with bumps and, you know, curves and things, that's when it all started getting hard and dark and confusing. It's about 12 years old, I think, that I just sort of restricted so much food and went into this mental health tumble.
There were quite a few arguments that broke out around the dinner table around her not eating, which I didn't pay much attention to because it was the 90s and we weren't talking about mental illness. But the arguments became more and more frequent, and mealtime all of a sudden became an unpleasant time. And then I remember Mum and Dad saying to Josh and myself, your sister has a mental illness called anorexia nervosa, and for a variety of reasons she's not eating. I remember thinking that's not that bad, because if the answer is to eat food, that's not that serious.
It became a house of a lot of silence. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And my problem was I wanted everybody to talk about what was going on, and we didn't really do that.
I think I was angry at her because before I properly understood mental illness, I just thought, can you not see what you're doing to Mum and Dad and the rest of us here?
It was very obvious that he was resentful of it. I think one of the moments that was definitely hardest was when we finally went to therapy as a family. And I think he said, if you don't get over this, if you don't change by next Tuesday, I'm out. It was like a Thursday.
In fact, it wasn't until she was in hospital, I think I started to understand that she really had no control of this. She was weighing about 30 kilograms and there was nothing of her.
Mum and Dad, I cannot believe how strong they were as parents and how wonderful they were. But it's a really hard thing to deal with as a family.
I'll never forget the silhouette of Dad hunched over the kitchen sink sobbing. And that's, I think, when I had a very strong feeling that we're not a happy family anymore. I felt a responsibility to try and do the opposite to what George's mental illness was doing to our family. I felt this responsibility to provide as much joy and as much laughter as humanly possible.
Say it all, though. It says so much about you.
He spent a lot of time listening to Billy Connolly's tapes, watching them for the sake of the timing and the storytelling ability.
I've often felt that the parents shove them out the door.
And I copied that. I'm going to tell a story about my day, and that's what I did around the house as much as possible.
I think that became his go-to. Like, I can't fix this, I can't do anything else, but I know I can make her laugh for a second and make everybody laugh. And that was what, like, our family was all good when we were laughing.
When I left school, I enrolled in primary school teaching. The day I started, I just loved it. I wanted to help young people not have a mental illness, which just sounds ridiculous even as I say it now. I applied for a job at a very small independent girls' school very close to where I grew up. I was ecstatic because I just thought, well, here we go. I've got my own class of young girls. I will make sure they do not get an eating disorder. I had grade 5s, so they're 10, 11 years old, and my first day in the classroom, I remember standing up in front of them and thinking, I'm going to make this so fun, they're going to love this. And I said, any questions? I put her hand up and said, why do you have such big eyes? And I'm not the other girls going, it's a good question.
You could sense that he really enjoyed the job. He loved working with the kids and helping them.
I don't know how much they learn, but they had a lot of fun.
Yeah, you sit here. I've got 4 photos to show you that I can't wait to tell you. It was a wonderful 3 years at the school, but soon after that, headed off to India. Okay, so do you want to see where I lived? That was my house. There was a village that were looking for volunteer teachers in the far north of India, up in the Buddhist community. And that went into the most life-changing 3.5 months possible. That's cool. So in the middle of the desert, so you can just see the sand and the rocks there. I'll never forget the feeling of shock I felt when I arrived in the village and discovered no running water, no electricity, sleeping on the floor. That boy there, he was a lovely, lovely boy. I remember meeting this kid, his name was Stunzen. He was so grateful for what he had. It wasn't much. By our standards, it wasn't much. If he was tying up his shoelaces, he'd point to them and say, Sir, this, what he was saying was, I've got shoes on my feet. How lucky am I?
It was so very different from our comfy lifestyle back home. These kids have had nothing compared to what our society had. Yeah. I think it was starting to dawn on me there's something going on here.
I just thought, I'd like to live here as long as it takes to work out what are they doing every day that makes them so happy that I could maybe talk to Georgia about when I get home. These people practice gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness every single day. They literally stop their days to practice it. So yeah, it's a daily meditation every single day.
He came back to Melbourne and realised that the kids he was working around the place were a lot more anxious, less sure of things than the kids he'd just been up in India.
When I was teaching a group of teenagers, I remember very quickly thinking this is my first opportunity to actually put this stuff into place with a group of kids who I think really need it. We had this rolling act of kindness that someone would do something for someone else, and then it was their turn to do something for someone else, and we'd just work our way around the class. I'd often finish the day by just saying, what's the best thing that happened to you today? I think that's when I really started to think about the possibility of maybe presenting these three things to a much bigger audience rather than just the class I was working with. But I also wanted to know, as a teacher, the science behind it, the evidence behind it. And so I went back to university and I enrolled in my Masters of Education, and my focus was student wellbeing.
He's not working in mental health as much as he's working in emotional health. These principles of gratitude and empathy and mindfulness are 2,500 years old and can be really, really powerful to alter our perspective, appreciating what we've got rather than focusing on what we haven't got.
We certainly are not presenting this as the answer to the mental health crisis that this country is currently going through. We like to see that we play a small part in helping people prevent these things happening in the first place.
I moved to LA in 2005, and it gave me this freedom to start a career in stand-up comedy and in voiceovers. I was very much still dealing with my eating issues. It really is something that never has left me. You just learn to accept that this is your life and your reality. I'd been in therapy for so many years, but it wasn't until 2008 when I had an unpleasant interaction with a man, and it triggered something in me.
Georgia came back to Australia and said she wanted to talk to all of us as a family. And we were gathered in Mum and Dad's kitchen when she started recounting a story that instantly made my blood run cold.
I told the boys, with the support of Mum and Dad, I had this memory come back of being abused, sexually abused by a stranger in the front garden of our grandparents' house when I was 2.5. This man taking me and doing things to my body that no person should ever have to go through.
And she looked at me and she said, we were in the front garden of Grandpa's house in Sydney. And I knew instantly what she was talking about. The man wandered into the front yard. I think he's in his 50s, I think. I don't remember what he said to me, but he said something to me. And he then walked over to Georgia and he picked her up and he took her inside the house. Honestly, I had no idea what was going on, but I didn't think anything of it until Georgia recounted that story and realised it was not innocuous. It was horrific. For some reason, I didn't say to Georgia in that moment, I remember that. I just froze, I couldn't talk. And the first thing I thought was I didn't protect her. I didn't stop this happening.
It was definitely a very clear moment to me of how our dynamic is, because Josh hugged me and Hugh went very silent.
I thought about it every day. I still think about it every day. But I also didn't want to bring up again with her because I thought, well, if she thinks that I didn't know about it, that probably excuses me not protecting her.
I've always felt like I was the broken person in our family. This, in a way, just made me feel like, God, here I go again. Like, I'm more broken. Look at me.
I think it was around that time a friend of mine said to me, "Do you want to come to class and talk about your trip to India?" The kids were very moved. I laughed a lot at the stories, and I just put a look on their faces. I just felt so energised by that. I thought, well, here we go. I've actually found a way to combine what I'm really passionate about, which is public education and mental health. I naively, as stupidly, quit my teaching job and thought this is what I'm going to do. And then I was met with a year's worth of no's. As I reached out to other schools and said I'd love to come and tell my stories, and they said, who on earth are you?
I remember thinking that it seemed to be hard work. There wasn't much money coming in the door. He was getting close to 30 and basically broke.
After about 2.5 years, I think I was about ready to give up. And then I got asked to come and speak at a principal conference, 55 principals in a room. And I think that afterward, 48 out of the 55 schools were present. So from that point on, I knew it was going to work. Do you know the most grateful person I've ever met in my entire life? Stuns and Sherritt. Every time he saw something he was grateful for, he pointed to it and he showed me. And he said, hey, sir, have a look. I was doing 4, sometimes 5 one-hour presentations a day in different schools all over the country. Now, the problem was the doorway to the classroom only came up to here. Well, it only came up to here. And I went, good morning, grade 3. Boom, away man door. My books went flying everywhere. I called it the results project. I just told a funny story after funny story, then the odd kind of moving story and emotional story. The very next day, I went into the classroom and Stuns and Sherritt was standing at the doorway. He had got an old cloth and he had filled it with leaves and sand. He had wrapped it all the way around the doorway to create padding for me, just in case I bumped my head again. And in there, packaged up was 3 key components of gratitude, empathy and mindfulness. And I know that's one of the reasons he was so happy, because every day he tried to do kind things for other people.
He really thinks about who he's talking to, and he'll speak to them in a language that they understand. From there, it just grew, kind of exponentially.
We're now working with about 800 schools and 400 early learning centres, with over 350,000 students, over 15,000 teachers. The next sort of 3 or 4 weeks are pretty big. We are a combination of fee for service and also some state and federal funding.
From Perth back in a couple of days and Sydney teachers. Yeah. The same way it took off in schools, it took off in all sports. I love your smile after.
He doesn't pretend to be a guru. He's mainly just telling his own stories and then using those stories to help other people.
Here are my 2 stories for you. The first, at the very heart of those stories was 2 of the most special people to me, my sister being the first one, and then one of the boys that I met over in India, Stuns. And my sister had become so happy with the way that she looked, she stopped eating. And this meant enormous damage to Georgia came and saw me do one of my talks after I'd been doing it for 7 or 8 years, and I think she was a little bit uncomfortable with it. She was in hospital for a couple of weeks because she dropped like a crisis stage.
I was disappointed that he was talking to the rest of the world about how he feels about me rather than talking to me, because there'd been no conversation. There was never a, how do you feel about this? It was this story that hadn't changed ever, but I'd grown and changed and healed. That dynamic with us changed when he sent me the chapter of his first book. That was the turning point for us.
I said to her, I want to check you're okay with everything I've written here.
The end of the chapter ended with I mourn the loss of potential in my sister because of what that man did to her. And I just was absolutely no. I just cannot be part of a message that says you get traumatized as a child and your life can't be great, because that's not true.
I remember just saying, what do you mean? Look, I'm doing so many right things at the moment, I'm doing so well. It made me realise that I think she could be the most resilient person I know. And yet I'd written kind of the opposite, really.
We were able to talk it through and have a conversation that was basically all the things we've never said to each other in many ways, like the adult version of it. And I was so moved that he created a whole other chapter in the book at the end to say, this book saved my relationship with my sister. Because that is the truth.
having these really difficult conversations, I still didn't have it in me to tell her my memories of what happened that day. In 2019, we made a decision within the business that I had to slow down, I had to stop giving so many talks because I was burnt out. It was getting close to 5,000 times I've done this talk with these stories in it, and the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden the need for what I was doing, or my talk, or whatever you want to call it, had never been greater. And I just felt like, I can't stop now. Like, this is not the time to stop. So many people need to hear this stuff. Our kids at that point were 4 and 1, and our 1-year-old was not sleeping. And I just kept going on no sleep.
He delivered more presentations than he ever had in that first part of 2020. But at that point, you know, he was out of gas himself.
There were 2 things that really helped me, I guess, throughout COVID. One was running. That was life-changing. But the other one was seeing a therapist for the first time in my life. When I'm doing my warm-up, I have stuff going through my head, but when the session starts, there's nothing in my head. Like, everything just goes and disappears. All my thoughts are gone, and that's a really nice feeling. It was my psychologist who made me realise I need to start letting go of so many things.
There's always been so much love there between Hugh and Georgia, but I think there was a lot to untangle there. But I didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know how much he was holding on to it.
I harboured a great deal of shame. It felt to me the whole time like a very sad irony that I had started this whole thing inspired by my sister's journey, and yet I had the power to help my sister for 10 years and I didn't do it. It was almost like the final frontier for me. It was telling Georgia. It was telling her that I was there and I remember it. And you're not crazy. And that did happen too, because I remember it.
I think part of me always wondered, did I create this story to justify the problems I put my family through? It wasn't until I heard Hugh's words that I could 100% say, it's okay. This really happened. It's true. And you can fully heal from it now.
She's taught me about resilience, absolutely, but probably more than anything, forgiveness is probably what she's taught me.
Forgiveness is one thing, but getting to have the life you want with your brother, I think that is an easy choice.
So tonight we're at the State Theatre for our 10th show of our Imperfects live tour. It just blows my mind that out of the thousands of comedians who worked with, not one of them saw it until today.
Because it was that good.
This is a high school thing.
I think what Hugh's superpower is to come at it from the point of going, I am just a curious and honestly flawed person, and I really am interested in this stuff, and I just want to get better. I just want to be better than yesterday.
Succumbi. Harry Succumbi. Harry Succumbi. Hugh is very aware of his imperfections and flaws and shortcomings. If he thinks he can use that as a way to kind of connect with someone, then he will. He is just being himself, and a lot of people are benefiting from that.
Thank you so much for coming along tonight. We are so excited to be here. I was 28 when I started the Resilience Project, and I'm 42 now, so a lot's happened in that space. So I was trying to tell this vulnerable story, and you looked like you'd seen a ghost. I think, especially early on, I felt like I needed to know everything, had the answers to everything. Self-esteem was completely shot, no confidence, I couldn't believe it. I felt like gratitude, empathy, mindfulness, that's all you need and you'll be fine. I now know that they help, they really do. but life is so complicated. And now I realise there is so much that I don't know, so much I'll never understand. And that is a much more freeing mental space to be in. It's a lot more real now, a lot more honest, a lot more vulnerable, which I think makes it a lot more kind of relatable. But yeah, it's been a hell of a journey.
If you've been affected by the issues raised in this program, you may wish to contact the following services: 1-800-RESPECT, 1-800-737-732, or the Butterfly Foundation on 1-800-334-673.
More advertising than you can poke an algorithm at.
Even banks are promising more. Last time you did more than money, we needed a royal commission.
The artificially enhanced new season.
I don't even know if I stand by that statement.
Gruen, Wednesday 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Economic growth family had never lost a live performance. Today, a hero sent off the Wagner mercenary chief calls off his rebellious march towards Moscow after a deal brokered by Belarus. Also ahead, embattled consulting firm PwC looks to sell off its government business for just $1. Authorities closely watching two dams at risk of breaching following a week of deluge in Adelaide. The countdown begins. Thousands swarm the Sydney Harbour Bridge weeks out from the Women's World Cup. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Korowa. A short-lived mutiny against the Russian government has come to a negotiated end. Wagner mercenaries, which had been threatening to march on Moscow, have backed down after a deal brokered by Belarus. Just 24 hours ago, the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, had declared a rebellion against the Russian Ministry of Defense, accusing Russian forces of firing on his troops. Now he has left the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, cheered on by crowds. The city had come under the private army's control when its troops left Ukraine. The Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko intervened, brokering a deal to call off the rebellion.
They wanted to disband the Wagner military company. We embarked on a march of justice. In 24 hours, we got to within 200 kilometers of Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of our fighters' blood. Now the moment has come when blood could be spilled. Understanding responsibility for the chance that Russian blood will be spilled on one side, we are turning our columns around and going back to field camps as planned.
Under the agreement, the Kremlin has dropped all charges against Prigozhin, who will leave Russia and head to Belarus. Ukraine's president says the incident shows Russia is in chaos.
Today is a day when there should definitely be no silence. Today, the world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. Complete chaos. Complete absence of any predictability. And it is happening on Russian territory, which is fully loaded with weapons.
Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has made a statement saying Australia is closely monitoring developments in Russia, adding the federal government will continue to condemn Russia's immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Global Affairs editor John Lyons has more on the situation in Russia and the implications for Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine.
I think it's a high-stakes chess game. This is not the end of the story by any means. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a very smart operator. Sometimes people underestimate him. You don't go from being in jail. I mean, who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? He was in jail when he was 20. As an 18-year-old, he got into crime. He had a tough childhood. 20, he's sentenced to jail for 12, 13 years for robbery and fraud. He then leaves jail, becomes a hot dog salesman, then does well at that, opens a restaurant, does well at that, he knew Vladimir Putin from St. Petersburg, starts getting contracts to cater for the army and for the elite, ends up a billionaire oligarch who basically faced down yesterday the man he used to serve nice meals to. So I think that where this goes next is Yevgeny Prigozhin. They got to the edge of the conflict. They did a deal. Putin didn't want to have the fight. We can see on the picture on the screen now the scenes like a rock star. You know, the warmth, the hugging. He was like a hero. No one tried to arrest him. Security forces didn't detain him. This is a man who has just said that Vladimir Putin has conducted an entire war based on a lie. This is a man who has said that the chief general who drove it did it because he wanted another star on his lapel, so when he laid in his coffin on a nice pillow, he'd have a nicer uniform. So he's gone all out attacking them. He now goes to Belarus. That's the deal. And they came back from the brink of civil war, but I think he will sit in Belarus and plot. The generals, the oligarchs will all now realise that Putin is a weakened figure.
So does bringing Belarus into the picture take some of the pressure, though, off Vladimir Putin? Is that the way that they've had to de-escalate this?
It solves the immediate pressure. We've seen pictures in the last few hours of the Russians, the forces, security people were digging up roads. They had bulldozers digging up the highways that led to Moscow to try to stop the Wagner people getting to Moscow. They got to within 200 kilometres. They were 2 hours drive away. So it shows you not a single soldier tried to stop Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner people. I think for Vladimir Putin, that would be what he'd be reeling about now. He'd be stunned by the fact no one tried to stop him. They were getting a hero's welcome. So the problem doesn't go away for Vladimir Putin. He is in a lot of trouble.
It buys him a little bit of time, but my next question is, now that we have Prigozhin going to Belarus, Wagner troops now retreating back into Ukraine, what do we anticipate will be the chain of command there?
I think that he'll pull the troops out of Ukraine. I don't think they'll stay there. I think now it's in his interests, Prigozhin's interest, now that he's declared his hand, that the war fails. So I think that's the end of Wagner's fighting, and they've been crucial. They have held Bakhmut and done all sorts of things. And so it weakens the Russian army. And so Prigozhin's, dream plan in a way would be the war fails, Putin's in trouble, they're looking for a charismatic leader who's got the cred. He's got a lot of credibility, Prigozhin, and with the Russian army and with the Russian people. He's very popular. People like him. He's blunt talking. He's been in the trenches. Yesterday, his reason for doing this deal with Belarus is, I didn't want any Russian blood spilt. It's a good line. I mean, it's a very smart political line. Putin would have spilt blood, Russian blood, that's the implication. He didn't want it, so he's done this deal. So he's gone right into the lion's cage. He's looked the lion in the eye, and we can see him there. He's straight talking. The Russian government has tried to stop him appearing on Russian television over the last year. There's been a ban on some television stations even having him on. Putin's threatened by him, but has needed him. So it's an intriguing relationship between these two who've known each other 25 years. They know each other's measure, and I think Prigozhin's playing a blinder of a game. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
And the Kremlin has also dropped that criminal investigation. So what does that tell you?
Well, it says that I think that it's a capitulation by the Kremlin, that they were surprised by, the audacity of Prigozhin to pull his troops out of Ukraine, to go to Rostov-on-Don, to take control of all of the military facilities in the headquarters of what was running the Ukraine war, then say, I'm coming to Moscow, They then get in their cars and their convoys. They then, go off and take Voronezh. They take a second town of control of that. So the message from him is, we go where we want to. Nobody stops him. The Ukrainians haven't been able to kill him. The Russian army haven't been able to stop him. So it gives him this sort of status in a country that appreciates and values its military and its strong men. It gives Prigozhin a really big launching pad. I think at some point he's looking for that political career to be a president. When Putin falls, there'll be a scramble for who takes over. He's now in the sort of box seat.
So, as you say there, Vladimir Putin's authority is completely, undermined by these developments. What do you anticipate might be going on there in terms of the political power plays, the allegiances that have been drawn up there?
Well, yesterday we saw the speech of Putin. That was not sort of your classic confident Putin. So I think there'll be a lot of people who've been watching this catastrophic war for Ukraine. It's been a disaster for Russia in every sense. The thousands of young Russian lives have been lost needlessly, the destruction of their neighbour, the international sanctions. The oligarchs have had all their yachts and apartments in France and other places frozen. So I think now there'll be plenty of people sitting there plotting. If they've got a chance to get Vladimir Putin, they will. I think someone will strike at some point. It's a matter of working up the coalitions, the private armies. You've got this sort of chessboard of the Gazprom private army of 50,000, Wagner's got 25,000, someone else has got 20,000. How do you stitch together an alliance, get the right people on the inner circle and then strike? I think that now it's a matter of Putin will be watching not just the cups of tea that he drinks because he's convinced someone's trying to poison him, but I think he'll be watching every person around him.
Now, taking that chess analogy a little further, we had Prigozhin targeting, in particular, the Defence Minister Shoigu and the military commander Gerasimov. Are we anticipating any changes in terms of Russia's military command?
I don't think Putin could do it at the moment because it looked like he was bound to Prigozhin. But Putin has been often getting rid of the National Security Advisor or the people running the campaign in Ukraine. He's dispatched a lot of them, sacked them. And so each time he sacks someone like that, he gets another high-powered, powerful enemy there. So in a way now, he's got that little Praetorian Guard around him of people who will protect him, the ex-KGB people, the people he trusts, but the waters are lapping up at the edge of him. And I think that at some point, he's got a meeting with Zelensky, he's going to meet his own fate, and he realised yesterday that could come close.
The America correspondent takes us through how the situation has been received in the US.
President Joe Biden delayed slightly his departure from the White House today to the retreat Camp David. He was briefed, first of all, here on the unfolding situation in Russia. We understand the Vice President was also at the briefing, and what the White House is telling us is that the President and Vice President will continue to be regularly briefed on what's happening. The National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has also now travelled to Camp David. He was due to head to Europe. He's cancelled that trip. And we're also hearing that the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, has cancelled his overseas travel. President Biden held a call with the leaders of the UK, France and Germany. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also held calls with key allies, as did Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin. So very much the message from here is everyone's across it, everyone's talking to key allies, and will continue to do so. We were told that on that call between President Biden, UK, Germany and France, they reiterated their unwavering support for Ukraine. And you can be sure the White House is assessing how these developments in Russia, how this internal dispute might play out for Ukraine's counter-offensive in Ukraine, whether the internal strife there will give Ukraine some kind of window of opportunity. There's also some reporting in the Wall Street Journal that planned sanctions on the Wagner Group, which of course isn't only active in Ukraine, but some planned sanctions to do with their other activities in Africa, are being put on hold because the White House does not want to be seen to be taking sides as this plays out. So I think what we're going to see over the coming hours released from the White House is really just a sense that they're briefing that everyone's across all events, but we're not going to see President Biden, for example, come out and make any kind of statement. I think perhaps it was best summed up by former President Donald Trump. He took to his social media platform and he said it's a real mess what's happening in Russia right now, but be careful what you wish for. Nixon could be far worse.
The trawled consultancy firm PwC of Australia has appointed a new chief executive and confirmed it will sell off its government business as it tries to stamp the fallout from a massive tax scandal. The firm has announced Kevin Burrows, a leader for its global business based in Singapore, will move to Sydney to take over from acting CEO Kristen Stubbins. PwC is also splitting into two parts, saying it would sell its federal and state government business to private equity firm Allegro Funds for $1. A second dam failure warning has been issued by the South Australian State Emergency Service, this time for the Adelaide Hills. It says the dam could threaten the safety of residents along Loberthal Road between Basket Range and Ashton. Meanwhile, roads are still blocked around a dam also at risk of failing south of Adelaide. The dam at Hope Forest could be a risk to several properties in the area. More severe weather is lashing the region today. Nationals leader David Littleproud has played down suggestions his position in the party is under threat. Anonymous Nationals MPs have criticised Mr Littleproud's leadership in News Corp papers. Their concerns include allegations the Queensland MP has a reputation for losing his temper at colleagues and staff. Mr Littleproud told Channel 9 he's not worried about a potential leadership spill.
We're all on borrowed time in politics. Don't worry about that, no matter your political party. Look, a couple of bruised egos. Look, it's the quest of the party room, and I've never taken anything for granted being the leader. It's the greatest honour I've ever been given to lead the party that I joined 25 years ago.
Funerals for the victims of the New South Wales Hunter Valley bus crash will begin from tomorrow. 28-year-old Angus Craig will be farewelled by family and friends at a memorial service near Nowra on the state's south coast. 10 people were killed in the crash while several others were injured when the bus rolled at Greta early this month. Canadian investigators have begun an inquiry into the Titan submersible, which imploded last week during a deep dive to the wreckage of the Titanic. Police and safety inspectors boarded the support ship, the Polar Prince, after it returned to port in Newfoundland. Canadian authorities have begun interviewing the crew to help determine what caused the tragedy and to determine if criminal charges should be laid. Today marks 1 year since the US Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, ending the constitutional right to abortion in the United States. Since then, 14 states have passed near total bans on practice. In many others, the fight over abortion access is still taking place. President Joe Biden says he will veto a national ban if Congress moves to implement one.
We've seen the devastating effects all across the country. Women turned away from emergency rooms, denied life-saving care. Moms, college students, teachers, nurses, traveling hundreds of miles to get basic reproductive health care. And since that dark June day last year, each of you has worked tirelessly to fight back. And the Dobbs decision in the court practically dared the women of America to be heard. This was the majority road. Women are not without electoral or political power. You ain't seen nothing yet, court.
Back home now, Sydney Harbour Bridge with a festival of football this morning in celebration of the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, which officially kicks off in 25 days. Host of ABC's The Ticket, Tracy Holmes, spoke to Rhiannon Martin, the head of FIFA Women's World Cup.
What we can expect, first of all, is massive stadiums. We've got some great opportunities here for everyone to come and watch. the matches. And I think really the level of football that we're going to see is going to be improving as we go through the tournament.
Well, a little bit earlier, you were with me up on the Harbour Bridge. It was incredibly windy, 4,000 people celebrating. They released the Unity jersey, which is basically reflective of all the colours, the host countries, Australia and New Zealand, and the landscapes in both of those countries, and a square for each of the 32 nations competing. It's a bigger tournament this time, the first time of 32 nations for women. What can we expect just from that increase?
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, increasing from 24 to 32 teams is massive for us. We've got 8 brand new teams as well playing, coming from actually all of the different continents as well. So I think what we can expect is to have, just really good quality football. We saw in the Confederations qualifiers last summer how just the level has improved over the last couple of years.
And you've been out, you've looked at all of the venues, you've inspected here in Sydney, across in New Zealand, Brisbane, Melbourne, all of the cities that are taking hosting events. But what about the players themselves? Because you must have noticed this in 2019. When there are full crowds, when there are full stadiums, when the world has tuned in, which they now do for women's football, what does that do with the performance on the pitch?
Yeah, you're quite right. It's an inspiration, I think, for every player to have got to this stage. It's absolutely massive. I think we will see, hopefully like we saw in the Men's World Cup in Qatar last year, that some of the teams who are performing for the first time will go even better than they were. I mean, we saw what happened with Morocco, what happened with Saudi Arabia in the Men's World Cup. We're hoping to have some surprise results as well. But all of the groups are very strong. I know Australia have got a particularly strong group, but just looking forward to some fantastic football kicking off in 25 days.
Yeah, we know that one of the teams that are making their debut here will be the Morocco women's team, and I've seen some shots of some of the facilities that they have been built for them, first time they've qualified, and they outdo some of the men's facilities that I've seen in some parts of Europe. I mean, there's a real investment and there's a real wish, and I think they just want the women to succeed in places that we haven't heard about before.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the investment that we have seen here in Australia and also in New Zealand has been pretty significant. Our training sites have been upgraded. We've got a very qualified pitch management team who are focused on making sure that the services that are being played on are going to be the best ever. And there's a lot of renovations going on as well here in Australia and New Zealand to leave a legacy behind after the Women's World Cup. So, yeah, it's very exciting and we're delighted to be here.
Now let's get more of the day's sport news with Jared Coote.
After separate Australia and England heading into day 4 of Women's Test match in Nottingham, Australia has a 92-run lead after dismissing England for 463 in their first innings. Timmy Beaumont was the star for the home side, posting the highest ever score by an English woman, reaching 208, which left England just 10 runs behind the Australians. Beth Mooney and Phoebe Litchfield then put on an unbeaten 82 runs then to end day 3. Irishwoman Leona Maguire has a one-shot lead heading into the final round of the Women's PGA Golf Championship. Maguire shot a 2-under par 69 in the third round, set at 7 under for the tournament. The world number 12 fired 5 birdies and 2 bogeys in her round. South Korean Jenny Shins hits a shot further back, shooting a field best 5 under the day in a bogey-free round. Grace Kim and Gabriella Ruffles the best placed Australian in the tie 12th, 6 shots off the lead. Essendon's 4-match AFL winning run has come to an end. The Bombers fell to a 32-point defeat against Fremantle in Perth. The Dockers kicked 14 goals 9-93 to 9 goals 7-61 in front of over 43,000 fans in Perth. Earlier, the Eagles went down by 171 points to Sydney at the SCG, the 4th biggest defeat in AFL or VFL history. The Swans won 31 goals 19, 205. 5 goals for 34. It was the greatest number of points West Coast have conceded since they entered the competition in 1987. The Adelaide Thunderbirds have pulled their spot in the Super Netball Grand Final with a thrilling 64-62 extra time victory over the Swifts in Sydney. The Thunderbirds trailed at every change until a 19 goals to 14 final quarter locked the game at 58 all and 4 forced extra time. The Thunderbirds then went on to win the extra period, 6-4 to cap off a dramatic victory. Later on today, the West Coast Fever take on the Melbourne Vixens in the minor semi-final.
Oh, to be fair, I think it's not something yet. These girls are just incredible. I think it's a nice show what we can do. Coming from last week and having a win, we knew they were going to go hard, and they did exactly that. And we're just so proud of how we all stepped up when it needed to be. I can't believe we're in the final.
The NRL Storm have lost to beat Manly 24 points to 6 in Melbourne. The Seagulls took the lead early on in the match, but the Storm scored 6 unanswered tries. Still an 18-point victory that keeps them third on the competition ladder. Earlier, the Panthers beat the Knights 20 points to 12. That's despite resting all 5 of their State of Origin players, while the first half blitz handed the Eagles a 48-20 win against the Dolphins on the Sunshine Coast. Australian Alex de Minaur is through his second ATP final of the season. The world number 18 beat the world number 6 Olga Rune in straight sets of the Queen's Club tournament. The 24-year-old made 9 unforced there is the 6-3, 7-6 victory over the second seed. De Minaur will be chasing an 8th tour-level title when he takes on world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz in the final. The Spaniard qualified for his first ATP final on grass by beating Sebastian Korda 6-3, 6-4. Crusaders have won a 7th straight Super Rugby title, beating the Chiefs 25 points to 20 in the final. Cody Taylor scored the winning try with 7 minutes remaining, handing the Chiefs just their second loss of the season. The Crusaders, who will now lose coach Scott Robertson to the All Blacks job, have won 14 Super Rugby titles in the past 28 years since rugby turned professional.
What happens when you combine the creativity of an Australian industrial designer and a French marquetry artisan? ABC Artworks gives us a glimpse of a project that centres on rare 17th century craft, now reimagined to create stunning and vibrant designs.
When the straw arrives, it's sort of like this long tube that I take and split with my nail and flat it into a ribbon. And then I will stick each ribbon of straw edge to edge one by one.
Straw marquetry as a practice has never been done before in Australia, so we have this absolute freedom where potentially after we're still in France, there's these expectations, and history and pedigree that you have to respect. So it's kind of this nice cultural mesh that we're doing something very different. We can be absolutely free.
I first trained as a cabinet maker in fine woodworking. I really want to do something a little bit different, and I was seeing all the waste in wood, and I thought, oh, the straw is really nice because it's sort of like this ecological material.
So Arthur came around with the straw and some of his samples, which were just beautiful. We created unique objects that are covered in straw marquetry.
From what we know, straw marquetry arose around the 17th century. It was done more by convicts and religious people. When people couldn't afford to use wood marquetry, they were using straw instead. Now it's sort of become the opposite because of the time you spend on it.
The hand-making component to it.
Yeah.
And companies, very luxury brands like Hermes or Louis Vuitton, Cartier, have really embraced it recently. Straw, actually, the cellular makeup has a glass component, and that's where it gets its reflective qualities and the iridescence. The straw's obviously dyed the colour, but there's no finish that goes on the straw. It is the natural straw that throws this incredible light and iridescence. Yeah, it almost looks like there's a battery behind it or something.
Because the whole process is handmade, it can take many hours and spend months.
Like, I think our largest piece might have 16,000 individual ribbons, so that's months upon months of laying the straw.
I guess it's meditative almost. It sort of reminds you that, sometimes it's good to take your time.
We're in no rush with these pieces. We just want to create hopefully special pieces, and if they take a long time, they take a long time.
And you can catch the full story and a whole lot more at 5 p.m. on ABC TV. Now let's take a quick look at tomorrow's weather in the capital cities. Brisbane, wind easing and sunny. Sunshine in Sydney becoming windy. Channel 2 for Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart. Showers in Adelaide, Perth partly cloudy and mostly sunny for Darwin. That is the latest from ABC News. Remember, you can also keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Miriam Corwell. Stay with us. Offside is coming up next.
And welcome to Offsiders. Almost from the moment they entered the AFL 36 years ago, the West Coast Eagles have been a powerhouse club. But after last night's 171-point thumping by the Sydney Swans, Perth's glamour team has hit rock bottom. It's the fourth biggest losing margin in AFL VFL history, and coach Adam Simpson must surely be contemplating whether he's the man to lead the Eagles out of the wilderness.
Comes to ground, hurried snap out of the pack immediately for the Swans, and they get the opener within the first minute of the game. Two in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's looking like a tough day at the office for Adam Simpson.
The heat is certainly on the West Coast Eagles as the Sydney Swans just dominating so many aspects of the game.
And this is where the West Coast Eagles are just getting it wrong. Look at all the youngsters around this contest and they all just get drawn into the football, about 6 of them.
It's going to be a real challenge for these senior players, for the Eagles and for the senior people in the club.
It's a proud club, the West Coast Eagles. They've been so strong for so long, it's actually hard to see it happen. Just don't see this in league football. There is the highest score for the Swans at the first 3 quarters in the history of the club. Advantage goal. Another one, 16 unanswered.
Actually, a loss like this, when it's going to need direction and solidarity. I mean, there'll be calls for the coach.
McLean, from almost point-blank range, check sides it through. What are we seeing in the SCG? The Swans crack 200. It's a bloodbath. The Sydney Swans defeat the Eagles by 171 points.
Obviously, pretty embarrassed about today. From start to finish, we're on the back foot. And we couldn't gain any type of ascendancy at all. And in the end, we got what we deserved.
The Swans kicked 21 of the last 22 goals to bring up the double ton at the SCG. Usually only talking about double tons at the SCG in summer. Our panellists this morning, Corbin Middlemass, Lisa Alexander and Jamie Pandaram. Corbin, you're a West Aussie. You spent the first 3 years of your life in Perth. What would be the mood in Perth this morning, waking up on this Sunday morning?
They are the biggest one of the biggest sports teams in Australia, not just in WA. 70% of the state barrack for the West Coast Eagles, so they're much loved, and in a national competition they've been as successful as any team, alongside the Cats and the Hawks really over the past 35 years. So it's so unusual to see the Eagles in this spot. I imagine they'll be flat as a pancake, those that are still invested. The bigger problem that you get to is the people that are no longer that invested. And as the Lumineers line says, it's not necessarily the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And if people start get to the point where they just think, I'm not engaged anymore, I'm detached from what's going on. And I think that's why the Eagles have ended up, without sort of trying to go too deep down this path, they don't tolerate losing. All of a sudden, losing's acceptable. Then they lose 2 games in a single season. Then they get used to losing by 100 points. They lose 3 of their last 7 by 100. And instead of being 100 on the weekend, it's 171. I mean, this is just a new low again for this West Coast Eagles, which is so used to setting records at the other end of the table.
Yeah, worst loss in club history. You've been in that coaching hot seat, Lisa Alexander. Do you feel for Adam Simpson this morning, and what do you think he'd be going through?
Oh, he'll be assessing. Look, I actually have watched him for the past few months, actually, and it's actually painful to watch because you can see the energy draining out of him, particularly at the press conferences. and the shaking of the head and all the things that go with that. It's a despairing place, actually, and I feel for him, but I think, some decisions need to be made at this club.
Clearly, and I guess the question is how soon those decisions will come. What did you think when you saw the scoreline?
I actually thought it was a misprint when I came up on my feed. Didn't watch the game, but I think this could be a turning point for the Swans as well. They haven't had a great start. You're the 12th on the ladder, but I tell you what, you'd hate to be coming up against the Swans and Geelong, last year's grand finalists, who aren't in the top 8. If you've worked that hard to get into the qualifying finals and face them in an elimination match. The Swans are starting to show some of that form that they have done traditionally after having poor starts.
Yeah. So the West Coast chairman, Paul Fitzgerald, was at the game yesterday, Corbin. We understand that he's flown to Melbourne for an AFL President's meeting this week because it is Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Coming up this week. So he will be under the pump. He is the big top decision maker. But how will the fallout go, do you think?
It's fascinating. I mean, the back page of the front page of the West Australian today, showing that it's the worst loss ever, obviously, in the Eagles' history. Predominantly black today, so it'll be a pretty dark day, I'm sure, for everyone in WA. I find their board dynamics fascinating. So you mentioned their chair in Paul Fitzpatrick, who is the brother of Mike Fitzpatrick, who, of course, is the former chairman of the AFL. So, a lot of experience. Not just him personally, but in his family bloodlines. Ben White is on the board, who is a man I have an awful amount of respect for, but he's part of this board as well. And the most high-profile name is Justin Langer, who, of course, is a well-credentialed elite senior coach. Acrimonious split with Cricket Australia in the not-too-distant past, and now they've got a coach who's on contract until 2025. They've tried to defend him at every possible turn. They've got a chief executive who's clearly on the rocks as well, who's been there for a long period of time, and the board are going to have a difficult decision to make. The interesting aspect about West Coast compared to other clubs, if this was any other team in the competition, I think we'd all expect that a loss of that magnitude means the coach goes, and that may be the case anyway. But the Eagles don't feel the same kind of pressures that other clubs do. So other clubs in the league would look at it and think, we're going to lose corporate support, we're going to lose fans, we're going to lose members. They have a whole heap of money in the bank. They had 10 times the amount of money the AFL had when COVID hit, just in reserves, sitting there, so that there is no financial pressure. People are queuing up to be a sponsor of this club. People are queuing up to be members. They pay $60, $70 a year, a few thousand of them, to wait in the wings to get a seat to be a West Coast Eagles member. So if you want to give up your seat, fine, somebody else will take it. So that there's not the same pressures. And I actually think all of that, and Lisa, you work in this space and will know this much more than me, but I think that whole attitude contributes to the fact that they're in the position that they're in now, when there isn't that edge to it and they can tolerate the type of defeats they are. We just see the snowball effect, and they're getting worse and worse and worse.
Adam Simpson fronted the post-match media conference late last night at the SCG, and it was inevitable. He was asked, is he the right man to continue in the job going forward?
Do you still feel like you're the right man, though, to follow this plan?
Yes.
I know you laugh at that question, but...
Well, because you're asking it. Yeah. Well, what do you think I'd say?
Short and sweet. So there wasn't much for the fans in that media conference last night. He certainly wasn't talking to them. Just to highlight how the magnitude of this loss, it is, let's have a look at this. It is the fourth in the 127 seasons, I think, we're having AFL this year, the fourth greatest loss. There it is, sitting there. So extraordinary, 171-point margin.
So the previous one was in 2011, and Dean Bailey was coaching Melbourne that day and was sacked afterwards. So that gives you some recent context.
And I think the other issue is that it is an issue for the AFL for the integrity of the competition, really, at the end of the day. The teams that are playing West Coast, and they said this about my team Hawthorn at the start of the year, that we were going to be the bye. Well, I can clearly show you Hawthorn have not done that, and they've been in somewhat of a similar position. But their young coach has got on with it and done the job. I think you're also looking at, are the AFL questioning the West Coast enough about what they're doing? They certainly would do that with the Gold Coast Suns, where their coach is under pressure at the moment. So it's very, very interesting, the difference in pressure that is to bear from the AFL, actually.
Well, the Women's Ashes has kicked off this week with a 5-day standalone test match to kick it off. The Aussies lead the test by 92 runs heading into the 4th day, so it is very well positioned. Bharat Sundaresan was joined by the Aussie captain Alyssa Healy after stumps on day 3, and they filed this report just for us. Bharat.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, we are at Trent Bridge, day 3 of the Women's Ashes Test. Australia forged ahead in the second innings. They had 92 runs ahead after they bowled out England. That means the deficit of 10 runs. And I have Australia Test captain Alyssa Healy with me. There was a long, hard day out there, but look, you ended up in the lead.
Yeah, long, hard day. I mean, we spoke about if we needed to get down and dirty and sort of spend a day in the field, that we were willing to do that. And I think it shows the beauty of Test cricket today, ebbs and flows. I mean, Tammy Beaumont had us by the scruff of the neck, and then to turn that around and bowl them out in the end. All in all, a really great day for us, and a lot of learnings hopefully taken into the second innings.
I mean, it was a record-breaking day. Tammy Beaumont with a double 100, the highest ever score by English women cricket. You played a lot of cricket with her against just a special moment for her. What was it like that for you?
Yeah, look, I think she batted really, really well. I mean, she had a little luck along the way, but I'm a firm believer that you need a luck in cricket to be a good player. So, full credit to her today. She was just in complete control of her game right throughout the day. The wicket's pretty behind, but in saying that, I think she just controlled it and controlled her end as well as she possibly could. So, yeah, it was great, Dan. It was great to see so many people here as well celebrating that. I mean, I've never heard a rowdier crowd when someone was on 199 in my life. So that was really cool. Full credit to her, and she gave them an opportunity to get close to our score, which is what they needed.
Yeah, so I'm giving it to you guys as well, which is good, right? It is the Ashes. And just you had a maiden century in a couple of years back as well. Annabelle Sutherland has been with the group for a while, but just to see her come of age in a way in this format, I've been quite appreciative.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's been what's so amazing about our group over the last few years, is that people have had a little taste of it, had a couple of opportunities, and then when we've really needed them to come to the fore, they've done just that. And I mean, I read it something overnight that, Elise Perry said that Belzy was going to be one of the best all-rounders that we're going to see a couple of years ago, and I guess now she's finally getting those opportunities to sort of show everyone how good she is with both bat and ball. And I think to score a century at number 8 for our side is a really great effort. I think she's just going to go upwards and upwards.
It's your game now. When you're next to ahead, you can force the game and literally said where it goes from here. Unless you lose a few wickets tomorrow.
Yeah, yes and no. I think there's an element of us feeling like we're in a good position, but we also know that there's 180 overs left in the game, and that's a lot of cricket. There's a potential for us, if we're not switched on and not concentrating, to have a mini collapse and all of a sudden, let England back in the game with a sniff. So we're going to have to bat well and probably bat long and give ourselves an opportunity and our bowlers an opportunity to have a real crack at England. We know they're going to try and chase down whatever total we put out for them. So we know we're going to have to bat really well tomorrow and hopefully set ourselves up in the game.
And just finally on a personal front, but you've been watching me play here. It's like, I just took a picture of him the other day. That went viral. I don't know. I mean, he's just standing in the queue trying to get in like everyone else. But, at least but getting to spend time with each other sort of away from home. So what's that been like?
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's nice that both Ashes series are running at the same time. It's a great opportunity for not just Mitch and I, but also the whole group. Groups to sort of share in one another's experiences. I know boys have been keeping an eye on this test match, and a lot of the girls are keeping an eye on the back end of the World Test Championship final, obviously the first game of the Ashes. So it's been great. The atmosphere over here at the moment is absolutely electric. So no doubt after this test match, T20 is going to be box office in those grounds, so I can't wait.
Keeping an eye on, is it playing a lot?
Oh, no idea, absolutely no idea.
I'm looking for a breaking news story. Thank you so much, Alyssa. Thanks.
All right, so I'll see you next time, Kelly, maybe.
There you go. Back to you, Kelly.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Some of us do have to work early on a Sunday morning. The story was Sutherland, of course, and that century in just her 3rd test. She's part of cricket royalty, sporting royalty, really. Dad James, former CEO of Cricket Australia, current CEO of Golf Australia, sitting on the Geelong board at the moment. She's got a good future ahead of her.
She certainly does. And it can't be easy carrying that surname. Obviously, Robert Will plays as an all-rounder for Victoria as well. But, magnificent stroke making. I think it was the second fastest century there. So, yeah, I mean, obviously she has carried a lot of potential, and now we're seeing it come to fruition.
She's lived, what is it? Lived, breathed. It's Sunday morning, Alyssa, okay? Just give me a break. She loves cricket from an early age. Have a look at these little pictures. It was so cute with Meg Lanning. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there you go. So she was certainly into cricket from an early age. Do you like the format, Colin?
Love the format, point system. So we're getting better with the point system, but we're still not there yet. So the test match used to be worth 6, it's now only worth 4. It needs to be worth 2. It needs to be worth 2 for the test, 2 for the white ball games, the 50 over and the T20. And people will be thinking, oh, but the test match is the traditional format of the game. The women never get a chance to play it. Not at district level, not at state level, not at international level. And so then when we have one every 2 years in the National Series, it shouldn't decide the whole series or one format that isn't the skill set that they get to display on a regular basis. So,
tell you what, Lisa, it was a pretty good week if you bat number 8 for Australia, because it started with Pat Cummins, didn't it? And that match-winning innings to claim that opening test for the men's series at Edgbaston. We have to acknowledge the bravery of Cummins. Just a month after his team was labelled too woke and too weak, Cummins has been labelled a climate catastrophe clown. He's been told to keep his politics to himself, harden up, and yet he and the new coach, Andrew McDonald, forged this new way forward, and it's working. I mean, this is a player-driven culture, completely different to what it was under Justin Langer.
It certainly is, and look, it's indicated by my text actually to another cricket commentator when I said, what about bowling some Yorkers? And then the very next ball, I'm not joking, I think there was a Yorker that got one of them out. I can't remember which one. However, being a long cricket fan myself and absolutely adoring the Australian cricket team, which I still do, and the women's as well, of course, Pat Cummins has actually been extraordinarily brave, extraordinarily out there with his views, and why shouldn't he? I mean, this is what Australia is all about. And he is leading the team passionately, and he's leading it from the point of view of a philosophy that says, I will empower individuals and actually go back to cricket traditions of the past, Dennis Lillies and the Jeff Thompsons. These players actually went out and contributed to the coaching environment. They weren't boys, they were men, and they went out and produced, obviously, together some magnificent situations and tactical work under great leadership of the Tackles in the past as well. I think Pat Cummins is magnificent. I love him to death. I love the way he bats. I love the way he bowls. Can we have some more of him, please?
Well said. Sport in itself, I love the coverage of the English press at this time of year as well. And you're a newspaper man, so you would agree. I think this was the best headline of the lot from Fleet Street, particularly when they just lose. Yeah, it says it all, doesn't it? How have you seen the English press react to this one, Jamie? Because Ben Stokes, he came in for some criticism. He's obviously got the aggressive baseball game plan going. And when you lose by a centimetre and drop a catch that was a tough one anyway, but this is what I'm talking about. They lose this test by a centimetre, and suddenly the whole philosophy of baseball's challenged.
It's challenged, but the criticism has been measured. The English press certainly given this team a little bit of leeway. Questioning at press conferences has been a little bit softer than you'd expect, because the English public is embracing this style of play. It is exciting to watch, and when they're making these bold declarations, it does set up a win-lose scenario. Fans with short attention spans don't want 5-day draws. You couldn't blame them. We're all saying we want to see that excitement. They're creating that. However, they go out and lose the second test, particularly the way they have been talking. They've essentially given Australia no credit at all for the win. They've just said, oh, well, we're the ones doing the entertaining. We're the ones playing all the cricket. Oh, yeah, we lost, but still,
felt like we win.
Lords is going to be, an absolute seamer, and the ball's going to go this way and that way, and it will be much better for it. And Australia's going to have to go to another level to beat us. You're down 1-0 in the series.
Yeah.
If they go down 2-0, there will then become the traditional Fleet Street scrutiny, and that's when Baz and Stokes and they all will come under pressure, and their style of game will be questioned.
What about the bombshell in the NRL in the last 24 hours? I couldn't believe this. Can you explain for our viewers, get your head around this one? So we're talking about a captain and the best player of one of the oldest and most famous clubs in the NRL, in St George Illawarra. I'm talking about Ben Hunt, set to walk out tomorrow on his contract because there's a new coach in place. He wants to return to Queensland. He's going to join the Broncos for the last few months of the season to see if he can help them win the premiership, and then join the Gold Coast Titans next year, all because he misses his family and the weather's a bit better.
Well, I'm sure the weather was a strong consideration, but look, Ben Hunt has been unhappy with the Dragons for a long time. It's a rabble of a club. They missed out on key coaching sightings like Jason Rolls, who they went after and didn't get. He's contracted to the end of 25. We are speculating here a bit, but the noise is so strong that tomorrow he meets the incoming coach, Shane Flanagan, and will ask for a release. Now, the Broncos, who he played with in the 2015 grand final, let's not forget. So he's a strong affinity with Brisbane. They only have salary cap space for the last 4 months of the comp. They cannot afford him beyond that. He's an $850,000 a year player. So, yeah, the theory is he will ask for a release and get one because that will free up $1.7 million in cap for the Dragons, while also not holding this guy to ransom who clearly wants to go, and then join the Titans from next year onwards. So Ben Hunt could go to the Broncos, replace the coach's son. Kevin Walder's son Billy is playing hooker. That's where Ben Hunt would play, try to win a competition, and then go to the Gold Coast. It's extraordinary.
What's the AFL comp here? Is it Pete Dangerfield? I think he's more chance to win Adelaide. He's going back to his old team, but next year he's going to play for Port Adelaide. Their crosstown role.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Second NRL coach of the season, am I right saying that, has been sacked.
Yes.
Justin Holbrook at the Gold Coast Titans, and they were sitting, 8th, 9th position, 6 wins, 7 losses, all because Hasler is waiting in the wings. I love the headline of your newspaper for this one. They've got everything, all and then here's Disneyland, and what's that little up the top there? It's got Des's hair on the logo.
Boo Bailey's excellent cartoon, yeah.
Oh, wonderful mullet.
Yeah, look, I was interested to read Barbara Phil's piece today that there was actually a clause in Holbrook's contract that said he would be sacked if the Titans weren't in the top 8 after the first couple of months.
Right.
They weren't at that stage. They're sitting like now, but it's been like another few weeks. And what they're sort of alluding to is that they've already had their buys and they don't see them getting to the finals. So the board made the decision to cut it off now. Now, Holbrook's been incensed by this because he says he didn't see it coming, despite the clause in the contract.
Yeah. And obviously the other person is Brad Fiddler, who might be looking for a place after the Origin series lost on Wednesday night. I do want to move on, though, because I want to ask you about the women's Origin. We're looking at, obviously, the vision of Brad Fiddler after the loss on Wednesday night. There's still one more series to go. 36, one more game to go. 36 to do was at Lane Park, so Queensland wins the Origin. Peter V'landys has done a lot right for women's Origin. He's given them a pay rise. He gave them an extra game this year. So we got 2 games. But the horror scenario happened because Queensland won the first game. In game number 2, in front of an incredible crowd in Townsville. You can see the final moments here. I couldn't believe what I was watching. It made me feel so awkward. New South Wales wins the game. Queensland wins the series. No one really doesn't know whether to celebrate or not. So the Blues won, but they can't celebrate. Queensland don't want to go bananas because they lost the game. Give them 3, please, Peter V'landys. This was horrible to watch. I didn't like it.
It's one of the, own goals of NRL this season because they've been doing a magnificent job, I have to say. I'm actually watching them in preference to AFL at the moment. But this has to be fixed immediately. It's ridiculous. The women deserve more. They have shown clearly that people are interested in wanting to watch it. And be fair income, please, Mr. V'landys. Thank you.
Well, the men don't need game 3. They've already decided their series. And
I was just about to say how empty it's going to be if, say, New South Wales do beat Queensland in that third side. So I think pressure is on Queensland to win that side and win it well.
Yeah, awesome crowd as well. Absolutely loved it. Finals time it is in Super Netball, and what a start to the Super Netball finals it's been. The New South Wales Swifts, they hosted the Adelaide Thunderbirds last night, and just have a look at this for the final last couple of moments of this game. So it was 19 seconds to go, And it is the New South Wales Swifts who have leading by 1 goal. The Adelaide Thunderbirds have got possession on the edge of the circle. So if they get the 1 goal, it's a draw and it goes into extra time. If they get the 2 goals and the super shot, the 2 points rather, they win the game. Here's what happened. Best finish ever. The Adelaide Thunderbirds ended up winning in extra time. So they move into their first ever grand final in the Super Netball Series. And of course, it's West Coast Fever playing the Melbourne Vixens in Perth later today. The winner will play the New South Wales Swifts. The loser is up for the season. But what a finish.
Amazing finish, especially Lucy Austin, because I did watch her as the Diamonds coach back in the day under the tutelage of Ginny Borlase at South Australian Institute of Sport. And I watched her taking many of these shots, but I loved her.
So she backed herself in for the win.
She did, and Catherine Cox said it quite clearly. She only needed 1. So her thinking at the time, but obviously she got that chance again. Because of the Taylor Williams intercept and Maddie Turner not getting the ball through and down court. A typical cross-court pass as a coach, I would have been having a conniption at the time. However, what a fabulous finish. And a finish with the 1-pointer, Kelly, not a super shot. The super shot was missed.
It was the New South Wales Swifts that were leading.
Yep.
And Lucy Austin came in the shooter off the bench for the Adelaide Thunderbirds. And boy, did she nail some of those super shots. And you were sitting there and you don't enjoy it.
I don't enjoy it. I actually turn away when the super shots time is on. But I remember Trent Copeland said to me via text, he said, well, it was really exciting, Lisa. They just went super shot in the extra time, which they're allowed to do. What I think it does, though, it changes the game and brings more lack of skill, to be fair. But at the end of the day, it was very exciting.
So ordinarily, if your 5 goals up 3/4 time as the Swifts were, you would expect them to close out from there.
Absolutely not. I can tell you, I coached the Melbourne Phoenix to a loss in a grand final. We were 6 up with 2 minutes to go and we lost the game.
So that's not necessarily super shot related. We saw that turnaround.
No, I don't think it is. But look, it gives someone some excitement, and I keep on saying it's not basketball.
The World Cup squad was announced this week. The 12 players that were picked. Of course, Australia won the silver medal in Liverpool 4 years ago. 32 days to go.
Thank you for that.
That's all right. To Cape Town, it kicks off on the 28th of July. The big talking point was Donnell Wallen. Missed out. She was heroic against England at the end of last year. Of course, this famous moment in the Test series against the Poms. You said in your column earlier this week that she brings the X factor. What did you make of her omission?
Look, it's not surprising. I think Stacey Marinkovic explained to the netball fans and public that, you know, Sophie Garben has been working with that squad probably a little bit longer than Nadal, and she actually brings the others out. So it's about combinations. I understand that. But at the same time, I know that the opposition will have analysed Sophie Garben to within an inch of her life. So whether she can get away with what she did last time. Also, her current form at the moment wasn't terrific. She's not shooting as much as I would have liked. And Donnell is actually presenting and shooting well. So, look, it's a tough decision, but it's a tournament. Donnell is going over as one of the reserves, and those reserves can actually be called into the team. That's the first time ever in the history of Netball World Cups.
Yeah, so there is Sophie Garben, of course, playing for the Magpies. Their season is over. So congratulations to the Thunderbirds, straight through to the grand final. Of course, they don't get to host it. It's going to be played in Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time. Final tip or observation, Corbin?
Just Alex de Minaur, who's playing a grass court lead-up event in Queens, which is a traditional opener, of course, in London. He's through to the final, so he had a huge win over Holger Rune last night, 3-6. He'll play Carlos Alcaraz, the world number 2, of course, the young Spanish star in the final. So good luck to Alex tonight.
Lisa.
Of course, the Asian Cup basketball, the wonderful Opals. I love watching them. Tess Madgen, of course, one of our wonderful offsiders, panellists now. Yep. They're going for top 4 qualification, and I hear the grand final is already a sellout.
Yes,
so
sellout
let's
next
hope
Sunday.
let's make sure they get there.
Yeah, good luck to Tess back from a knee injury. And Jamie.
Well, the Super Rugby final was played last night, and as usual,
Oh, don't
the
tell me.
Crusaders
It was the dancing
prevailed.
coach?
It was the
Can we
dancing
see it?
coach, and an enormous result given that the Chiefs had beaten the Crusaders twice already this year. They were hosting it, but this man, the next All Blacks coach, and there he is with his star player Richie Mo'unga, who was also playing his final game for the Crusaders, celebrating as he usually does. The guy has coached the Crusaders for 7 years and won 7 premierships. Just an incredible strike rate, along with Mo'unga, who bows out. Of course, Mo'unga will play for the All Blacks at the World Cup this year, and then Robertson will take over after that.
And is Eddie Jones naming a Wallaby squad today?
He is indeed, in a matter of minutes, with a captain and a 33 or 34-man squad for the Rugby Championship. So look out for that.
Yep.
Well, Eddie, I haven't been able to get onto him all week, so that's why he's been
He's
a
a
little
busy man. If the All Blacks win the World Cup in Paris in September, October, he's going to dance?
Oh, I mean, Robertson won't be coached then, but the challenge is there for Ian Foster to step up.
Sorry. Well, Ian Foster can dance.
He can do air guitar really well.
Okay,
Eddie.
all right. No worries. Thank you very much, everyone. Finally, I want to acknowledge some crew members who have been with Offsiders since the start of the program but are leaving us this week. Danny and Goran, you're the heart and soul of this show, and you've made it feel like a family each and every Sunday morning. Goran, we promise we'll try and squeeze some motorsport for you in every now and then just for you. You annoy me every Sunday morning about that. And Danny, we're going to miss that twinkle in your eye, your bubbliness, that great sense of humour and the loudness. Thanks, guys, for caring about the show as much as I do from everyone here. We're going to miss you.
Definitely.
That's the program for today. You may have heard that 7'4" Frenchman Victor Wembanyama was the #1 pick in the NBA draft this week. San Antonio Spurs fans are delighted to have the best prospect since LeBron James on their team. 10,000 fans packed into the Spurs home court to watch the draft on a big screen, and they certainly gave Big Wemby a warm Texas welcome.
It is on fire in San Antonio, Malika. They are so ready to welcome yet another generational talent to their town, to Texas, and hopefully win yet another championship here in San Antonio.
Coral, the top stories on ABC News. Mercenary boss Yevgeny Prigozhin has ended his short-lived revolt, which he said was in response to an attack on his soldiers by the Russian military. The mercenary leader accepted a deal brokered by Belarus overnight to end the mutiny, in return for Moscow dropping charges against him and his fighters. Prigozhin will be exiled to Belarus as part of the deal. Consultancy giant PwC Australia has appointed a new CEO and confirmed it will sell off its government business as it works to fall out from the tax leak scandal. Kevin Burrows, a senior executive based in Singapore, will move to Sydney to take over from acting CEO Kristen Stubbins. PwC says it will sell the government business to private equity firm Allegro Funds for $1. The South Australian SES is monitoring a dam at high risk of failing at Hope Forest, south of Adelaide. Locals notified emergency services yesterday that there was a weakness in the dam wall, a point where temporary repairs had been made. Thousands of people have walked across the Sydney Harbour Bridge to celebrate the FIFA Women's World Cup. The Cup kicks off in Australia and New Zealand in 25 days. Those are the latest stories from ABC News.
today on Landline, meet the New South Wales couple who've endured the hard times of floods to be named Farmers of the Year.
I think we tend to work from extremes, and like we tend to have extreme drought years and we tend to have extreme wet years. We've seen it the last 6 or 7 years.
The fishing industry pioneer who's become an abalone rancher.
Food's there, the environmental conditions are fantastic, there's pristine waters, and they just grow naturally without any intervention from us.
And reflections of a life on one of Australia's most famous outback cattle stations.
We did get an awful lot of very white, pimply, hunch-shouldered, unsure, hesitant, shy young men, and they strode out of there in December or November as different young men.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Catastrophic flooding devastated the small central western New South Wales town of Eugowra late last year. The waters swept away crops, livestock and fencing at Tess and Andrew Herbert's mixed farming operation. But they've emerged from those lows to be named Farmers of the Year. Dubbo-based reporter Hannah Jose looks at why they won and how others could learn from them.
6 generations of Herberts have lived and farmed outside the tiny community of Eugowra, about 330 kilometres west of Sydney. The family owns a number of blocks of land, but the home farm is called Gundamain, sitting beside Mendadgery Creek.
In the mid-60s, Dad and Mum, it was a family partnership. And my parents sort of, there was three brothers and a sister, and they dissolved the partnership, so they all went their different ways. And then they were trying looking for a name, and they ended up coming up with the name Gundamain, which means small hut by a stream, which is an Aboriginal term, so that's where the name came from. And Eugowra sort of comes from washing the sand from the hills, so that's probably pretty appropriate for what's happened the last 6 months, so yeah.
In the early hours of a wet spring morning in November last year, Eugowra was smashed by a record-breaking catastrophic flash flood. 2 people died and more than 150 had to be airlifted off their roofs. The damage was extensive at Gundamain, costing them millions.
The trauma of that event was that it affected our town. Once we dealt with how our staff were coping and the people in the town were coping and the town itself and how it rebuilds, then we had to look at our own business and how we would rebuild. So the loss of stock, sheep, the loss of crops in particular, which we were relying on for cash flow coming into the business, the loss of infrastructure, sheep yards and fencing and roads, all of that. We then had to have long, hard conversations again with our bank, but also with our staff and our contractors as to how we would move on from all of that.
But the Herberts have endured the crisis, partially thanks to a highly diversified operation.
What we have made the decision to do here works really well for us. So to have an intensive facility means that essentially we're drought-proofing in a way. We're also able to deal with the shocks of climatic events or supply chain extremes. So any of those we can deal with because we've got a consistent cash flow. It's what we relied on heavily during drought and during the flood event.
Tess and Andrew Herbert have a well-known feedlot. They also run sheep, breed Angus cattle and grow some crops. A very different operation from when they started.
When we married, it was a smaller mixed farming operation with a piggery, and he had started a small cattle feedlot. I continued, my job was teaching. I was teaching in Forbes, about 40 kilometres away, and continued teaching through having 3 children and maternity leave. And then we decided to build this larger feedlot in about 2000, and that really diversified It's allowed us to produce hay and silage, which comes into the feedlot, so we're pretty well self-sufficient in those.
In the mid-90s, early 90s, we were feeding a few cattle and we probably weren't doing it very well. And we went up through the Darling Downs and had a look at a few of the feed yards up there, and we were sort of very impressed with what we saw. And then we came back to the idea that with the fodder we had locally and the cattle that were being bred locally, we could put all those things together. We'd like to build a feed yard.
6,000 head of cattle can be housed in the feedlot at any one time, and about 25,000 are processed through it a year. They employ about 20 full-time staff across the operation. Now, the couple had experienced flooding before, but nothing like this. It's shown them they need to prepare for future severe weather.
I think we tend to work from extremes, and like we tend to have extreme drought years and we tend to have extreme wet years. We've seen it the last 6 or 7 years.
We've always dealt with severe climatic events, but I think that they will increase over time. There's no doubt about that. And I think we need to be prepared, both in what will happen, but how we respond when it does happen. I mean, the economic diversification is also part of price risk management. That's one of the reasons we've done it as well. If we're forward contracting, we're managing our price risk too. But the more you can manage the external risks for your business, the healthier your business will be. And it's been a focus for the business to manage that. I mean, I'm really interested in measuring natural capital and what, because we live on the land and with the land, and how we can measure our impact on our natural resources is important to the business.
I mean, we need that grass all year round, and we need that feed all year round, and that's where we need to look to have improved pastures. We tend to, the last 20 years, we utilised a lot of our feedlot manure, and probably other than a bit of nitrogen, that's probably all that's being brought in, mainly. It's probably just increased our humus in our soils a lot. And also we probably, especially on our grazing crops, we run pretty high stocking rates on those grazing crops. We're able to now because we're getting a lot more feed through those. You've sort of got to have rainfall to utilise that, of course, but as you can see behind us, we've sort of got a lot of early oats in already, which is up and growing, a lot of cattle on those paddocks already.
This week, the couple were announced as Australian Farmers of the Year in a ceremony in Canberra.
The 2023 Australian Farmer of the Year award goes to Tess and Andrew Herbert from Eugowra in New South Wales.
I'm gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe that we had been recognised in this way.
What really struck us around Tess and Andrew was not only do they run an excellent feedlot, a finishing system for cattle, they also run an integrated enterprise where they grow good fodder, but then also the amount of industry work that Tess has done and the amount of innovation that Andrew's brought into the business is outstanding. When we've got a lot of variability within the different systems, to be robust, to be able to withstand that and have the tenacity to survive those hard times, it does mean that you've got to diversify your business to a certain extent. It's great to be professional at what you do and do it really well, but you've got to make sure you've got your peripheral risks, those variables under control. And that's one of the things that the Herberts have done really well.
While their operations have recovered from the flooding better than most, they're still paying off the damage. This September, it'll be 150 years that the Herberts have been on this Eugowra property, and they want to keep it in the family.
We have to do a bit of a sit back and see for a little while after the flood. Recovery will take some time, potentially years, but you know there are more opportunities out there for this business into the future. That may not be me, it may be the next generation, but we can certainly see more opportunities.
Yeah, what a milestone. It's pretty exciting to be part of something that's been going for that long in the same family. We're still 100% family owned. It's very, very exciting. I'm looking forward to celebrating it.
Caitlin is one of Tess and Andrew's 3 children. She's been back at Gundomain with her husband Ed for about 5 years after trying her hand at dentistry.
Yeah. I thought I'd want to do something else, and I maybe put it down to me being a bit too independent. I thought I was going off to do my own thing, but I just couldn't scratch the itch. I had to come back. Yeah.
Parents would love all their kids to be involved in the operation, but they don't want to pressure them.
Yeah, we definitely love to expand. It's not just about getting bigger, it's also about getting better at what we're doing too. Ag tech is huge at the moment. It's probably the fastest growing thing in the ag industry at the moment, and so it should be really something that we need to grab and use to its advantage. I'd love to see more tech around the compliance side of things, because it is constantly getting more and more red tape around this industry.
The Herberts attribute part of the success also to their community and strength of their relationships with neighbours, friends, suppliers and staff. They've embraced change to keep their family farming, and they believe that for it to continue to succeed, it'll change even more.
I like to look at it as farm being a bit like a family heirloom. You sort of have to pass on the next generation better than they pass on to you, but that's, yeah.
Mum and Dad have left us really big shoes to fill. It's going to be a really tricky one to make our own mark on this business in the same respect that they have. Ed and I will give it a go.
Last week marks a year since varroa mite was detected in a central hive near Newcastle. Hundreds of beehives across New South Wales have been destroyed to try to stop the mite from spreading. And it's not just beekeepers counting their losses. Farmers relying on bees for pollination have also been hit hard. Muswellbrook-based reporter Bindi Bryce has a story.
Pumpkins are a staple at Matt Dennis's farm at East Maitland. He needs an army of bees to grow his vegetables.
We got a lot of zucchinis, pumpkins, watermelons, and they just need the bees to go from the male flower to the female flower, and nature.
Normally, this paddock would be crowded with buzzing bees.
We're looking for a bee. See if we can find one.
You haven't been seeing many of them lately.
Well, there is one, but they're rare as teeth.
That's because the Hunter Valley is in the middle of an emergency response to varroa mite. Millions of bees have been destroyed in the region. Matt Dennis has lost a dozen beehives on his 32-hectare property.
The conversation's more or less been about the beekeepers, which is fine, but it will affect us too. It's going to affect the backyard grower and everyone, like the food trees and everything.
Varroa mite is a tiny parasite that weakens and kills European honeybees. Australia was the only continent in the world free of mite until June last year, where it was found in central hives at the port of Newcastle. The New South Wales Department of Primary Industries is working to eradicate the parasite. Every time varroa is detected, it triggers an eradication zone, forcing everyone in a 10-kilometre radius to get rid of their bees, even if they're not infected. Almost a year on, Matt Dennis says there aren't enough bees left locally to do the job of pollination. Are there any particular veggies that have been more severely impacted?
I would say the pumpkin mainly, and the watermelon. The yield was way down, probably 70% down on normal.
It's been devastating for beekeepers and farmers who need bees to grow crops.
I think most people understand that relationship that you build with your bees is incredibly important. And to lose it, you sort of, it's like losing a grandson, something like that.
Purple Bear Farm at nearby Annambah is a small-scale biodynamic permaculture farm. It regularly hosts school groups and holds seminars to teach people about agriculture.
When it was in full flower,
Farm manager Mark Brown wasn't able to grow any almonds this year.
There were just no pollinators. mostly our nuts and pumpkins and those sort of cucurbits in there really do need bees.
Farming has been hard in recent years around Maitland. There have been droughts, bushfires, severe floods, and now varroa mite.
The effect on my mental health when they killed the bees was fairly devastating, really, and it's taken me quite a while to sort of come to a reality that, you know, this is the way it is.
Feeling hard done, but you know, I've seen farmers in tears. I've seen farmers who are so impacted that they feel got no hope.
Cafe owner Amarel Dempster spearheads a slow food movement in Maitland, promoting local food and the time and effort it takes to grow and make. She's concerned about the effect of varroa mite eradication response and has been supporting farmers by helping organise regular meetings with the DPI.
It's really important that the emergency response of varroa mite and the management part of it takes into account that these farmers need pollination for their crops, and that it's managed in a way where the baiting programs are done taking into account the cycles of pollination.
Another side effect of the bee cull is huge fruit and veggies. Less pollination means those that do grow get more nutrients. Ms Dempster is also working to find local markets and restaurants to sell the giant produce that's too big and unappealing to sit on the shelf at a major supermarket.
It's been great. Like the slow food movement is fantastic. Like the Earth Market, everyone there, all the volunteers. Like it's a tight-knit community, and we look after each other, and that's what we're all behind this.
Farmer Matt Dennis has turned to a beekeeper friend for help.
We've got the local native bee Anne Fox here. And she's given us 2 hives, but we just can't source any hives to pollinate. Like we rang up in Queensland, no one was willing to send the bee hive down, like the native bees here, because they might be poisoned.
I'm not sure that they're going to fix the problem entirely, but certainly aids are being a solution for helping pollination at the moment with varroa.
Well, we can only give them a go. There's no harm in trying. We'll see how it works.
Losing most of his pumpkins this year has him nervous.
Moving forward, we need some pollinators. Like, I don't care where they get them, but if they just get them in here, if they're going to wipe out all the bees, we need something to do the job. Like, otherwise, that, like I said, it takes out probably a quarter of our income.
New South Wales' new Agriculture Minister, Tara Moriarty, says farmers who are losing income because of low pollination can seek support through the industry body, AusVeg.
It's been really tough for them, and I'm very sympathetic. They also understand, though, that it's so important that we do keep this mite contained to that geographical area because they don't want anyone else to experience what they've experienced.
Registered beekeepers can apply for compensation when beehives are destroyed by the DPI. Farmers don't have that option.
Yes, I've certainly heard from a number of those farmers. Happy to work with them, but they do have a body of veg who they can work through, and I would welcome them and invite them to do that and have AusVeg work through processes to make any suggestions that we can consider to assist them going forward.
Mark Brown has plenty of questions about the varroa mite incursion, like how did it happen?
Who's going to get a kick in the pants for that failing? I don't want to kick anyone in the pants, but I do want an explanation.
He believes the DPI should stop with its eradication strategy.
After that monitoring failed, we should move very rapidly to managing the varroa mite. Just the way they do in Europe, in America, all over the world now, they're managing the varroa mite.
And it's still the plan to eradicate this mite from New South Wales and from Australia. We can't give up. We've come this far and we just can't be in a situation where we just allow it to spread.
Mark Brown says losing his European honeybees has made him appreciate Australian native bees, which are less vulnerable to varroa mite. He won't be rushing to replace the destroyed hives.
It's only since all my bees have been killed that I've had an opportunity to look more closely at the native pollinators. And it's not just bees, you know, wasps and things like that are all becoming more obvious as pollinators.
Matt Dennis doesn't know if it's worth trying to grow pumpkins and zucchini again.
A nice chunk of the income is gone. Next year we have to sort of organise out by June whether we go ahead with pumpkins and watermelons. And zucchinis, like next year they're talking, you know, bees have to say, what happens then? Do I buy a plant? The outlay for that's probably $20,000. And without the work, and then the pollination, well, no crop, that's sort of a waste of that money. Plus my home.
New South Wales's eradication strategy is continuing. Tough times will drag on for Maitland farmers until the bees come back to the valley. Amarel Dempster just hopes the crisis won't deter the next generation from beekeeping and agriculture, and that farmers are supported.
To keep these young farmers going, we will need compensation, and I feel that they were left out because in the initial emergency response. And I think that when people understand the impact of that on their daily consumption of food and production of food, then I think they will be quite sympathetic to what needs to be done to get this under control.
I'm Christy O'Brien in the Northern Territory. Coming up on Landline, we meet Sally Warriner, who is not just a station manager's wife, as she so unflinchingly penned in a memoir she's just written about working on one of Australia's most famous cattle stations.
Hi, I'm Kath Sullivan. The National Farmers Federation says Australia's commitment to ban live sheep exports could jeopardise its trading relationship and obligations. In a submission to the panel appointed to advise the federal government about the live sheep phase-out, the NFF says the ban places a significant risk to Australia's status as a valued and trusted trading partner.
We need to make sure that that process is sound, that countries make decisions. They can do what they like. They need to make those decisions based on informed, credible science, data and evidence. And that's what we've seen in the past with some of the cases we take to the WTO. And we have to be very careful that we don't do the same thing in terms of live sheep.
We think those claims are quite exaggerated. The reality is the live sheep export trade makes up a small fraction of 1% of Australia's agricultural exports. But ironically, it is the live sheep trade that has created a lot of damage to Australian agriculture's international reputation because of the cruelty and the suffering associated with the trade. So phasing out the trade in an orderly way that assists producers in that process really is the way to put the Australian sheep industry on a much more sustainable footing.
In a statement, the Trade Minister says the development of a phase-out plan for live sheep exports by sea will take into account Australia's international trade obligations, including under the World Trade Organisation. Victorian authorities have removed hundreds of tonnes of liquid waste, 10,000 tonnes of contaminated soil and 51,000 gas cylinders, ensuring the small town of Kaniva is no longer the site of the state's biggest toxic waste dump. 5 years ago, the Victorian EPA discovered this rural property, almost halfway between Adelaide and Melbourne, was a dumping ground for toxic waste.
We had chemical waste, liquid wastes, we had asbestos, we had acetylene cylinders, multiple different waste types, all buried, 32 locations right across the site.
The local community held concerns that waste would present fire hazard and contaminate the groundwater they rely upon. This dodged that bullet, but some of the waste did leach into soil.
There's no evidence to suggest that it has got into the waterways, but it's reassuring to know with what they said tonight that they were going to continue to monitor those aquifers.
It's really great that that's been cleaned up and, well, we can get back to normal, I suppose, yeah.
This is the most complex clean-up that EPA Victoria has certainly been involved in, and there have been a lot of people say that it's probably one of the most complex cleanup that Australia's ever seen.
The property's owner is facing 44 charges relating to the waste at Kaniva, along with dozens of others relating to properties owned in Melbourne. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges and will stand trial in the Supreme Court in February. Lab-grown chicken has cracked the US consumer market, with the sale of cultivated meat given approval by the American regulator. The move heralds a new era of meat production aimed at eliminating harm to animals and reducing the environmental impacts of grazing and animal waste.
Often anything that's new, whether it's an electric car or it's ChatGPT, it feels strange or peculiar initially, but after a period of time, it becomes ubiquitous and boring, and that's eventually the path of cultivated meat.
The meat's grown in steel tanks, starting with animal cells, fertilised egg, or a special bank of stored cells. The techniques are yet to be approved for Australia. The process is also much more expensive than farming birds and can't yet be produced on the same scale. And finally today, an Australian endurance athlete has broken the world record for the Backyard Ultra Marathon event on a Queensland cattle farm, having run more than 600 kilometres in 4 days. Phil Gore ran 102 laps, or loops, of the Dead Cow Gully Backyard Masters event west of Brisbane. Billed as a race with no finish line by its organisers, the format requires runners to complete a loop of 6.7 kilometres every hour. The race continues until one runner remains. That's Landline News.
Our next story is about a fishing industry pioneer who is literally taming the wild seas. Landline's Sean Murphy has been following the progress of a former abalone diver who's enhancing nature by growing abalone where previously they didn't exist.
Morning, Brad. Good to see you, mate. How you
Nice
been?
to see you again. We're on our way to the world's most abundant resource of green-lipped abalone. It's an enhanced fishery at Flinders Bay in the southwest of WA. Just a decade ago, there were hardly any of the prized sea snails here. For Brad Adams, it's a dream come true.
Well, I guess they can. It depends what you wish for. But yeah, what we've created here is just amazing. Starting up for the first time you were here in 2011 when it was just trials, research and development, me and a little boat and one employee.
When we first caught up with the former wild catch abalone diver, he was experimenting with artificial reef designs. He was convinced Flinders Bay was an ideal location for the world's first ever abalone ranch. It had abundant feed and pristine waters, just no reef for the abalone to grow on.
A number of designs that I've used, it was real backyard sort of stuff. I've got solid blocks, hollow blocks, round tubes, pester blocks, and some work really well and some don't. So it's been a real learning experience as to what's suitable and what's not. It's a big experiment. So I'm trying the size of abalone release to work out what's the size to put them in the water. So we're looking at growth rates, we're working out mortality. I've got a number of different habitat designs I'm trialling.
By 2016, he transformed Flinders Bay, building a 12-kilometre long reef with 5,000 of his custom-built cement habitats. And abalone transferred to the reef as hatchery-bred juveniles were thriving.
Birds there, the environmental conditions are fantastic, pristine waters, and they just grow naturally without any intervention from us.
Today, a team of 14 divers harvest up to 90 tonnes a year from a 20-kilometre reef. It's evolved from a sea ranch to an enhanced fishery, and the abalone grown here fetch a 40% price premium above farm product.
So what we've created out there is actually fishery. So it's actually called a hatch fishery. So the abalone that we produce there is a wild product, and wild abalone are in high demand in the world because most of it's aquaculture.
The reef has become a diverse ecosystem, attracting hundreds of species of fish, and this positive environmental impact has helped gain sustainability certification from the Global Marine Stewardship Council, or MSC.
A set of sustainability criteria set by the Marine Stewardship Council that you get assessed against, and you have to meet all those hurdles to then be assessed as a sustainable business under the Marine Stewardship Council guidelines, so that customers, when they're choosing their products at the retail outlets or in the restaurant, they know that their choices are actually coming from renewable, sustainable fishery.
This fishery is really unique. There's sort of 650 fisheries around the world that have MSC certification. Just 2 are abalone fisheries, and this is the only one that has kind of enhanced element to their operation.
So how old are these abalone? So these have only been on the reef for 3 years.
Yeah.
Average size around about 240 grand.
Matt Watson is the MSC's Senior Fisheries Project Manager for the Asia Pacific. He says the company will be subject to ongoing conditions to maintain its certification.
MSC has recognised their performance world-class, but certainly there's a condition that say, if we understand how the fishery interacts with the habitat, we want to see a slight uplift in performance there, and certainly the genetics. So we need to make sure that the hatchery doesn't kind of play God too much with regards to genetics, making sure that we safeguard kind of genetic attributes in the wild stock.
Ocean-grown abalone is in big demand across Asia, with companies selling a range of shucked or whole-in-shell products that are frozen or canned.
We're very popular, of course, selling abalone into Asia. Markets like Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, what's interesting in Japan, Vietnam. Recently, had some strong inquiries from India, some markets where abalone is from Australia is quite new, but there's lots of demand for premium products from Australia, which means that
Marketing manager Alex Wilson says the MSC boutique will be a game changer as the company expands its market reach beyond Asia.
If you're talking to a major hotel chain, Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, Sheraton, having MSC opens the doors straight away. They know immediately we're MSC, so they'll engage with us. They might not know our brand particularly, could be new to their market, but having that just opens doors, gives us instant street cred.
Brad Adams was also recently named a Sustainable Fishing Hero by the MSC, and he's a passionate advocate for getting more people to try abalone.
To the Asians, it's a symbol of prosperity. And something we work at that, you cook it, if that's fried like that for 20, 30 seconds, you end up with really soft texture, which sort of melts across your mouth.
While it's a premium restaurant product, he says for as little as $20, Australians could be adding abalone to a home-cooked meal.
People think it's out of the price range, number one, which it really isn't. It's actually quite affordable to spend $20 and get a good taste of abalone. It's a very rich product, so you don't need to eat a lot of it. It is not sort of an entree dish or a tasting dish, but there's a lot of market resistance to it because of that price.
His favourite is sashimi.
Just a little dip. Give that a crack. Yeah, so people don't realise how underrated abalone is at the same product. It's just sensational because it's got that sea ocean texture, taste, and it's just an amazing thing to eat as a sashimi product. And in Japan, it's highly revered as a product. In Australia, quite not yet.
The company recently changed its name to Rare Foods Australia and is keen to expand into more premium produce, including wine that's ocean-aged on its seabed lease. Glenarty Road is one of 2 wine labels cellaring its sparkling wine 18 metres below sea level. Winemaker Sacha McDonald is selling the ocean-aged cuvee for more than 5 times what the same conventionally cellared vintage goes for.
So it's a great story, it's great marketing, but does it really make a difference?
We really think so. I mean, what we're really trying to do is build up that texture and complexity in the wine, and we're letting the ocean do all the hard work for us. Instead of stirring the bottle like the French do in Riddling, we're kind of letting the ocean do all that and build up that texture and complexity in the glass.
Fresh in the box.
And what's the market reaction been like from your customers?
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, people see this beautiful bottle, and then when they actually know that it's had that amazing process underwater, yeah, it's been snapped up so quickly. We can't keep up with demand. It's lost away, actually.
Cheers.
Who knows where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 years' time even. I'm hoping to be Australia's premium exporter of rare and premium products out of the southwest.
He says there's still plenty of improvement to come on the 400 hectare lease, with better survival rates and understanding which areas produce the best growth. There's also a chance to help the MSC certified wild abalone fishery, which is struggling with decreased recruitment. Licensed divers have been placed on zero allocation this year.
The technology's there to be able to do it. There's success stories out of South Africa about rehabilitating bull ranching over there, which is putting juveniles from the hatchery onto the wild beds there, and having great success. So there's no reason why we wouldn't have that success here. And we've done trials in the early 2000s on exactly that and had great success back then. So yeah, the opportunity is there to do it. It's now just to sit down and work out how we can actually make it happen.
G'day, I'm Matt Brand. Australia's cattle herd is on track to reach its highest level in a decade, and according to Meat and Livestock Australia, by 2025, the herd will have grown to 29.2 million head, which hasn't been seen since the late 1970s. Some of the other key points from MLA's mid-year cattle projections is that the number of cattle being processed is soaring, and is now tipping Australia will process nearly 7 million head this year, producing 2.2 million tonnes of beef. Now, the big question for producers is what will the prices do? MLA put this question to 7 industry analysts, and so here's a look at their thoughts on what the benchmark Eastern Young Cattle Indicator will do between now and Christmas. Opinions in this group did range from nearly 600 cents a kilo to about 500 cents. The average, though, has got the EYCI ending this year slightly lower than what it is today. Now, the same question was asked of these analysts earlier in the year. I'll add that line now, not to poke fun, but to show that cattle prices have fallen faster, harder and further than the best analysts could have predicted. And there are many who feel the cattle market has overcorrected. Now, given cattle prices have been sliding this year, well done to the Johnson family from Rennell Park, who have broken a record. They sold this bull at the National Shorthorn Sale in Dubbo for an Australian breed record of $106,000. This bull is called Slurpee and was bought by the Falls family in Riverina.
Bulls certainly deserve money. I can't take credit, he did it all by himself, really. Like, guys just absolutely jumped the rail again. Certainly was a lot of fun. The bull was very, very good. Mulch Shorthorns bought him. They do a great job down there at Finley, and we use them quite extensively over a pretty large herd of cows.
To the sale yards this week, where cattle numbers lifted, especially in New South Wales, and prices held up. Agents in Tamworth said there was stronger demand despite a mixed offering of cattle that was showing signs of colder weather. Sheep and lamb prices went off the boil, though, until producers who have been waiting for prices to improve have essentially run out of time and are now selling old lambs regardless. And a number of abattoirs have now gone into their winter shutdown for maintenance, which is reducing demand even further. Like New South Wales and the state of origin, the wool industry is limping towards full time in season 22-23. The EMI fell by 35 cents this week, with the greatest falls at the superfine end. At both Melbourne and Sydney, 17 micron wool dropped by around $1 a kilo. Global grain prices continue to surge as the dry weather lingers in the US and crop conditions get worse. It's also been reported that Russian and Indian wheat crops have dropped below initial estimates. CBOT wheat futures rising to its highest point since February. And some of that is starting to rub off on the Australian market, with gains across most port zones for premium wheat. Canola remains volatile, and the price of barley in Queensland has reportedly sparked an interest to transship barley from South Australia up to Brisbane and to feedlots in the Darling Downs. Sugar futures fell during the week, but so did the Aussie dollar, meaning the Aussie sugar price still sits above $800 a tonne, which is sweet news for growers. There are challenges though. Cane growers in the Herbert River region of far north Queensland say millions of dollars worth crop has been destroyed by rats. Here's a look at some of that damage. A huge plague apparently has been chewing through the crop. Rats. That is the Landline Check.
Next week, a unique Aussie-funded buffalo rental scheme changing the health and wealth of farmers in Laos.
I asked a local farmer if we could buy milk from their buffalo, and they looked at me like I was mad. That was 8 years ago. We made a lot of mistakes, but we've had some major successes too.
Helped along by Australian livestock lick blocks, they improve not just the nutrition of the buffalo, but ultimately the people too.
A little bit of intervention makes a huge difference to these people. Bringing blocks with these cattle sees higher milk production, sees better calf survival, you see more income families. An extra calf a year means a child can be educated. Extra milk means that that child's protein goes up through the roof. Simple intervention like that we take for granted in Australia.
That's next week on Landline. Not just the General Manager's wife. It's a pretty loaded title for a book, but it sums up the lack of recognition women on the land have experienced over the years. In a brutally honest memoir, Sally Warriner lets rip about life on some of Australia's biggest cattle stations and how critical wives are. Landline's Chris O'Brien caught up with Sally, and it's a yarn with a very special connection for our Northern Territory crew.
That's right, Pip. Some stories come full circle, and Newcastle Water Station is definitely up there, but probably more so for my sidekick and cameraman Jumbuck.
Yeah, look, I went to Newcastle Waters in the early 90s and put together a video for Sally Warriner about life on the station, and from there I spent the next few years on and off flying around in a Beechcraft Baron with Ken Warriner all over the CPC stations in the north. Got to meet some great people, got the taste for the bush life in the north, and here I am still doing it. And we managed to find that old video, dusted it off, and we're going to use some of that in the story, so treat yourself.
Sally Warriner certainly looks the part in the middle of a muster in the Northern Territory in the 1980s. But being a station wife wasn't an obvious fit, and at times she felt a lack of the innate pedigree.
The Born to It girls were always going to be much better horse and cattle people than I was, but I persevered and I loved going out mustering.
She's self-confessed queen of shuffling hats, a nurse, secretary, mother, hostess, quasi-counsellor, homemaker and now author. She's run more out of life than most.
You just can't be a princess, you've got to manage what you've got.
One thing that did set her apart was her nursing qualifications.
We had a lot of accidents, a lot of jackaroos falling off horses and breaking arms and legs and things.
A far cry from earning her stripes in English hospitals as a 20-year-old.
So it was pretty well timed in London. I did not know how I did it. And I didn't sleep, I don't think, for the entire time. And I used to ride a little Vespa with my cape billowing out behind me round the big roundabout at Charing Cross.
Moving home and stepping onto Kimberley dust would prove love at first sight, but not in the way you'd expect.
Everything about the Kimberley, the light changing in the evenings, the gums, the eucalypts reflecting off the water, the millions and millions of birds, all the wildlife. I think the intense colour, the intense blue sky, the changing colours for the sunrise and sunset, and I also thought the people were wonderful.
Her other great love was initially, anyway, less instantaneous.
Me and my hippie boyfriend Morris got straight on the road and he shaped up to Broome to visit my sister Susan, who had 2 sons in my absence. So I wanted to see them before heading back to Canberra and deciding what to do with the rest of my life. And that's when I met the GM. And Ken turned around, saw us walking up the road, and he said, "Oh my God, have a look at what the cat dragged in." And Susan said, "Oh, that's my sister." So it wasn't love at first sight.
GM, or General Manager as she calls him, wasn't her only suitor though.
I was a single girl in town in those years, very, very highly prized. No single women at all.
But revered cattleman Ken Warriner would ultimately win out.
I mean, basically follow the man. And so I was in love with him, and I loved the Kimberley, and I loved the life, and yeah, made a conscious decision that that's what I wanted, without ever thinking, is this going to be too tough for you? It didn't occur to me.
They managed the iconic Brunette Downs in the 1980s before a business venture came up to jointly purchase and run Newcastle Water Station in the middle of the Northern Territory.
We drove over the grid to Newcastle Waters and saw total desolation because I'd been there. And of course, Ken had looked at the cattle and the pheasant and the waters, and I don't know if he'd even looked at any of the houses on the place. So I had no clue what I was going into. And so there it was, a little tiny fibro off the ground because of above the flood water, cement floored little house. And I can't remember catching my breath and thinking, my goodness.
What followed was a whirlwind few years.
It was really rough times in those days. Obviously changed a whole lot now, and it did too. But in those days there was no air conditioning in the men's quarters. There wasn't any hot water. They often had to cook themselves in the stockhouse. They weren't even. A lot of the stockhouses didn't even have a kitchen. They weren't even cutting a van kitchen. Most of the time, I mean, that went on for about 10 years, I think, out there, and there was just no complaints.
She was thrust into being a mother to not just her own brood of boys and stepsons, but the younger workforce.
And I have to say that we did get us an awful lot of very bright, pimply, hunch-shouldered, unsure, hesitant, shy young men, and they strode out of there in December or November as different young men. Absolutely. A number of parents who said that at that time in bush met my son. So